This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
4 minutes after 10 is the time. We will be hitting the prison conversation imminently. But first, I mean, one job for the President of the United States of America. Just don't get Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky mixed up, Joe. That's all you got to do. I've got clips coming out my ears of him being really brilliant and sharp in some of the Q&As that happened at that NATO summit. But I think increasingly, given the conversation we had together yesterday and the one we had a couple of weeks ago about whether or not that there is any prospect whatsoever of this sort of cognitive decline stopping or reversing, I cannot see how he sticks this out. I cannot see how he takes it all the way to November, unless they sort of, find a lookalike or something. That of all the gaffes, if we'd sat here yesterday and said to each other, what's the worst thing Joe Biden could do tomorrow within the realms of plausibility? So, I don't mean mistake his wife for a horse or something like that. I mean, within the realms of plausibility. What's that book by Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? Not a horse. I don't know where I got that. Well, anyway, that would work as well. I don't mean mistaking his wife for a hat. I mean something that could happen on a podium. We've seen a sort of freeze at an earlier event where Barack Obama had to sort of usher him off the stage. But if we'd come up with what's the worst thing that could happen to Joe Biden tomorrow, I think if you'd said he gets Zelensky and Putin the wrong way round, you probably would have won. Don't you? I know it's a tough conversation. I know there's something terrifying about the plummet into quasi-fascism that would happen in the event of a Trump win. And that makes us terrified of talking about the Biden thing. But you absolutely have to. You absolutely have to. He's in decline, and it ain't going to get better, as Stuart puts it. Anyway, if you're joining us and you weren't listening tomorrow, we did a full hour on that yesterday, so we won't do today. But I think if he's still in the job on Monday, then or still in the race on Monday, then we're going to have to return to it again and again. Although it's one of those topics that is going to become, I think, more and more consensual. There's going to be more and more consensus on this, isn't there? To the point where eventually there'll be nobody really arguing that he has to stay in the game. 6 minutes, and the stakes, of course, couldn't be higher. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. They've been in power for a week, so you have to conclude that this situation would have happened anyway. I heard Robert Jenrick this morning giving an interview to Nick in which it seemed that he was unaware that his own party had been in power for the last 14 years. If you want an illustration of the oddity that persists from the last regime, the last administration, I'd point to the fact that I think I might have imagined this. It can't be true. Are they putting Chris Grayling in the House of Lords? So Chris Grayling, apart from that time when he gave a big shipping contract to a company that didn't have any ships. Do you remember that? Chris Grayling, widely regarded as one of the key contributors to the sort of collapse in the justice system, the probation service and the prison service. Also, a byword for incompetence in the context of almost his entire ministerial career. One of Rishi Sunak's last acts as Prime Minister was to put Chris Grayling into the House of Lords. So in the week that we learn they're putting Chris Grayling into the House of Lords, we also learn that jails are becoming too full to accept new inmates. This is an observation of, was it Buckland, not Jenrick, I do beg your pardon. It's Robert Buckland, former Justice Minister, sounding as if he didn't know who had been in power for the last 14 years. But the phrase, the language here, regarding jails is incredible. It's the sort of thing you'd expect to happen in a sort of banana republic or a failed state. Jails are becoming too full to accept new inmates. And were that situation to arise, and we're about 400 prison sentences away from it, were that situation to arise, senior police sources have told the media that there would be a breakdown in law and order on UK streets. So the cells in police stations would be filled with suspects and convicted criminals, which would mean that looters and other criminals could go on the sort of rampage knowing that they couldn't be incarcerated. I've worked it out now. I was a little bit confused at the start. So you'd know in the context of a crime that there was not a space to lock you in if you were caught doing it. What would happen? What would happen? I don't see why anyone would fib about this. I mean, I don't see why anyone would lie about it. Alex Chalk, the former Justice Minister, he has given a couple of interviews to podcasts lately in which I'm not suggesting, I certainly don't want to inflict the curse of O'Brien on him, but he sounded really sensible, actually. I mean, he's somebody that the Conservative Party should, well, he lost his seat, actually, so they can't. But, I mean, he's a reminder that they weren't all mad in the last administration, and one or two of the non-mad ones even managed to rise to positions of relative prominence. They just got completely overcrowded by all the mad ones. But he essentially wanted to do this, but they didn't think they'd be able to get it through Parliament, partly presumably because Labour would have voted against it, but so would Tory rebels. You know what the front pages are going to look like. In fact, I haven't double-checked yet, but I can probably predict that the Daily Mail will have done something on its front page that seeks to turn this into yeah, here you go. Labour accused of scare tactics over full jails. So the idea that they're fibbing about it. They haven't got anyone to tell them this. You can tell this story is a complete flyer because they quote a Tory source without actually naming anybody. A senior Tory source said, "This is shameless scaremongering from the Labour Party that risks causing mass panic." Why wouldn't you put your name on that if it was true? Are you accusing the Labour government of actually making up a prisons crisis so it can do something controversial that it probably doesn't want to do? It's quite extraordinary, that. Why wouldn't you put your name on that if it was true? Especially because if it turns out not to be true, you could then do a lap of honour saying, hey, I told you that wasn't true. It's obviously true that the prison system is full. And it's obviously the fault of the people that have been in charge for the last 14 years. And it is obviously impossible for the Daily Mail to acknowledge or admit that. So they're trying to pretend that it's not true without coming up with a single theory or reason. I imagine the Telegraph are doing the same as well. Without coming up with a single theory or reason as to why on earth the government would lie about this. To make the last lot look really bad. There you go. That you create a vacuum and the theories will move into it, however unlikely. So why are the government making up this prisons crisis? Oh, to make the last lot look really bad. Well, just pause for a minute. I don't think the last lot could look any worse, could they? Really? No one's going to go, do you know what? I thought they were doing a great job until I found out about the prisons being full a week after they suffered the most crushing defeat in the history of British elections, their most crushing defeat since the Second World War. I thought they were great until I found this out. So these are the numbers, right? There are about 700 places left in the adult male estate. And that is already an estate in which cells designed for 2 have 4 prisoners in them. So the idea that, can't we just stick a bunk bed in that cell over there which has got a single bed? That happened years ago. That's been going on for 14 years. You forget that austerity even hits areas like this as well. So there are 700 places left in the adult male estate. Do we know how many people get sent to prison in an average week? What's the average number of prison sentences handed down by judges in the average week? Because if there are 400 in the coming days, then that figure falls below 300, the number of places left in the adult male prison estate. If it gets below 300, then prisons effectively become too full. The system, the entire estate, it's a good word, that. The entire estate becomes full to capacity, to the point where you won't be able to keep people in jail. So convicts, actual convicted criminals, will be brought back from court to a police station and they will be locked up there. But in the cell next door is a suspect awaiting questioning over a crime that he's believed to have committed. But we need that cell for someone who's already been convicted of a crime. So it's a sort of hierarchy of crimes based upon chronology. So we need this cell. We need this cell because we've got an actual convicted criminal coming back from court in the back of a van. And the custody sergeant's going, yeah, but this fella, we think he's a murderer. Doesn't matter. He's not a convicted criminal. You're going to have to let him go. Is this what they mean by a breakdown in law and order? Because once word gets out on the street that they haven't got any room left in the police station because the prisons are full, what is Johnny Fingers, the well-known safecracker? What's he going to do? I'll tell you what he's going to do. He's going to go out and crack some safes. And if he gets caught, he's going to say, what are you going to do? I don't know. That can't be right, can it? Is it that bleak? Is it that bleak? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If you are... I know there's a limit on what police officers can and can't talk to me about on the radio, but you don't have to use your real name. Is that it? Is that what we are actually talking about? And then, of course, I need to ask the question, is it true? But is that what a breakdown in law and order means? I tried to sort of come up with a slightly more sophisticated analysis of it, and I can't. It's a finite resource, prisons. Think of it as a single building. And there comes a point where you can't get anybody else into it. I suppose you could sort of put 20 people in a cell designed for 2, and then I complain about human rights legislation rather than fixing the actual problem. Oh, that's what the Tory party have been doing for the last 5 years. But the idea that the system has... Yeah, I think you're right. That's where I got the name from. Johnny Fingers was the... pianist with the Boomtown Rats. I do apologise, Johnny. I just sort of like that. But Bobby Fingers, the well-known safecracker. The idea that the system has been permitted to get this bad it's objectively extraordinary, isn't it? So if you're in the sector, if you're in the business, as it were, how has this happened? COVID has played a big part in it, I think. Bottlenecks suddenly turning into surges. But how do you explain this? As a prison officer, would you know enough about this if you were in the prison service? 0345 6060 973. As a police officer, especially, one associated with custody, and that's not a silly thing to say. Not all police officers are intimately and immediately associated with custody. How has this happened? Have we been here before? How close have we been before? And who knows what a breakdown in law and order would look like? Who can tell us? Beyond what I've just said with my fictional safecracker, what about looting? You remember during the riots, the London riots, when Boris Johnson was mayor and stayed on holiday for an unconscionably long amount of time. You remember that people were getting prosecuted for stealing bottles of pop from shops, and presumably we had the capacity to lock them up. But if the word gets out that we haven't got the capacity to lock people up, people are going to pile into the electronics shops on Tottenham Court Road or wherever you are in the country, your local branch of Curry's. And is it that simple? Is it that straightforward? Is that what a breakdown in law and order means? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And yes, Steve asks, if an actual safecracker calls in, James, will they get a Ray Liotta? Well, that will put me on slightly morally difficult territory, Steve. A reformed safecracker who can tell me what they would have done in their days of cracking safes would definitely get a Ray Liotta. But I don't know that I can offer up that accolade, that lofty accolade to someone who's still cracking safes. So police officers, really, because I don't imagine any recidivist criminals are going to call me and tell me what you would do in the event of a breakdown in law and order. But the reality of the moment, I want you to explain to me. Is that what a breakdown in law and order would look like? 0345 6060 973. And what are the myriad reasons why this happened? And I think it is important to recognise that COVID was an exceptional event, and political incompetence and economic cuts will have contributed to this. Putting people like Chris Grayling in charge of anything will have contributed to this. But it won't just be, you're not really allowed to say, the Tories are just awful, that's why everything's so bad. I want the detail and the explanation and the evidence. So in the rear view mirror this morning, how the hell did this happen? 0345 6060 973. And on the road ahead, and anyone can join in on this, I just think that police officers and criminals, cops and robbers, there you go. I just think that cops and robbers would probably have a little bit more insight into it than the rest of us. But I could be wrong. Feel free to prove it. on the road ahead, what is a breakdown in law and order? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. This is a crazy, crazy story. Sometimes the headlines, and we're so used to discussing crazy stuff at the moment, they don't quite do the job, do they, of conveying the gravity of a situation. Guardian goes for a very measured crowding could spark breakdown of law and order on the inside pages, but the right-wing papers go both ways. The Mail is trying to terrify your mum. Labour accused of scare tactics over full jails. So we'll add that to the list as well. Put that in as part of the conversation. That's question number 3. Why would Labour lie about this? And the Telegraph, violent prisoners will be freed early. That's to scare your nan. But then even they have to admit in the next line, police warn of breakdown of law and order. Not Labour politicians. The police are warning of a breakdown of law and order. There's a lot to get into here, and I'm looking forward to it. The number you need, as you know by now, is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10. I knew I could rely on you. Phone lines buzzing, and some of the texts coming in are really brilliant. Prisons are like rivers full of drowning men and women, says Jack in Cambridge. We need a massive programme to stop them falling in the first place, not just allowing them to crawl out a little earlier, soaked in shame and stigma. Jack, you're a poet, and you know it. And Jay puts it brilliantly. If I fail to convey the scale of the problem, or you perhaps are allowing yourself to be a little bit sceptical because the Daily Mail is telling you to, just remember the hospitals. Jay's in Runcorn, and he writes, James, it's in the same way that ambulances are queuing at hospitals because there are no beds to put the patients in. We'll have paddy wagons queuing up outside courts and prisons until places are available there. The breakdown in law and order comes either with the erosion of confidence or fear from the criminal side of the system. Wow. Munir is in Mitcham to kick things off. Munir, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm a bit worried about this, though.
Well, yeah, don't be. I think the bigger picture is they need to do what they need to do to put incarcerate people, because I know as bad as it sounds, if they needed the space, they will find the space. So, like, I used to work in fighting young offenders about 2014ish. So I left in 2014, for example. And if there was anything like this situation going on then, so you know, like when they cut funding and stuff like that, so a lot of people taking retirement, and it was the old school, like the ex-army officers that they kind of got rid of, and then they ended up hiring younger, cheaper people.
No, I know about all this. No, respectfully, Munir, but we're talking about there's only 700 places left. They've done all the doubling up they can do. They've chucked all the bunk beds into the cells that were only supposed to have single beds in them. If it gets below 300, what happens?
So I can speak for fighting young offenders. I know they have like 4 units that are not being used, but I get what you're saying. Historically, what I've seen has happened is sometimes they have officers who do different jobs inside the prison service. So like remand workers, like release workers and stuff. So they'll bring them off those side jobs and they will try and get them back onto the unit. Sometimes they only take them off the unit because they can't do that job.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say you've not been in the system for about 10 years.
Oh, yeah, 2014 is when I left.
You left in 2014.
Yeah.
I'm psychic, because I think you'll find that things in the ensuing 10 years, they were bad when you left, and they've gone absolutely bonkers since. And so that apocalyptic prospect, that question of what would actually happen, is something nobody knows. It's a precipice over which we have never looked, which is why police are warning that it would be a breakdown in law and order. So what do police officers think about this? Thank you, Munir. I'm not in any way ungrateful for your call. I'm just looking at what has happened between 2014 and 2024 to take us to a place where I don't think we have ever been before. 24 after 10. Mark's in Wigan. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello, Mark.
I'm just phoning up, and it's lovely to speak to you, but it's a horrible subject.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. A relative of mine is currently locked up. He got sentenced about 15 years ago, now 16 years ago, on an indefinite prison sentence, an IPP, which has since been scrapped. It got scrapped in 2012.
But it doesn't affect if you're on one. You're still on one.
You're still on one, and there's currently 1,800 people still locked away on it. Now, he wasn't allowed to. They weren't even going to look at releasing him until he completed some training courses. And And the problem for him was he couldn't get on the courses because they were all full. Because
the system was groaning under the weight. Would it be so? I mean, I know he's your relative, so is that a parrot in the background?
It is, yeah.
What
It's
else?
a noisy little thing.
Is it just a parrot, or can I hear something else as well?
No, you can hear one of the dogs as well.
It's a parrot and a dog in the background.
Yeah, 3 dogs.
So I can't. So I don't know how much you've been listening this week, Mark. And I know that we're having a very serious conversation, but you've got to find your opportunities to have a smile when you can, haven't you? I've been using an app on my phone to try to identify bird song when I've heard birds chirping in the background, but I don't think I can do it with your parrot because the dog will interfere, and that I won't be able to get a nice clear. What's the right word for the noise that a parrot makes? No, there's a dog. Does the parrot ever impersonate the dog?
No, the parrot whistles the dogs and calls the dogs. And the dog copies my whistle
and then the dog comes running to the parrot.
Yes.
Your house sounds absolutely bonkers, Mark.
My house is bonkers.
Well, anyway, back to your cousin.
So,
would it be safe? Would it be safe to release him?
At this moment, no, because he was sentenced on an indefinite sentence.
Yes.
If you think, can you imagine being locked away, not knowing when you're going to be released?
No, I can't. It sounds like something out of Greek mythology, doesn't it?
It does. And then you can't even consider to be released until you've done training courses that you cannot get on because it's full.
Yeah, that's
so his mental health deteriorated greatly.
I'm sorry.
And unfortunately ended up in hospital.
Oh, Lord above. But that is like a kind of a perfect storm, isn't it? Where you can't get out unless you've done the course. You can't serve your sentence because it's indeterminate, and you can't get on a course because the courses are all full, and the courses are all full because the prisons are so full, and the prisons are so full, which leads to a breakdown in law and order, and we can't free up a space with your cousin because of the cycle of events that we've just run through. Mark, thank you. I mean, listen, it is one of those phone-in questions to which nobody actually knows the answer. What would happen? 0345 6060 973. But I suspect. And Peter's been in touch. Who's an ex-DCI from Twickenham, Nick, who contributes to the programme quite a lot, contributes to the station quite a lot. Peter Kirkham. He says, you are actually spot on the money, mate. It would be, it wasn't me, it was Jay in Runcorn who described it in this way. It would be just like the ambulances queuing up outside A&E. I'm not sure we should use the word paddy wagon. A couple of people have pointed out to me that it might involve a little bit of casual racism against me and my fellow Irishmen, but you know, Black Mariahs or custody vehicles are queuing outside police custody suites due to, this is already happening, due to so many police stations being closed under Theresa May. I know this is a bit upstream from your topic today, but it's another aspect of the very same issue. If someone needs arresting, if someone needs to be sent to prison, then we should never be deciding against it simply because there is no cell available. And yet it would appear that we were already in that sort of scenario. So again, Peter's ex-job, so I don't know what people who are currently in the job can tell me, but you've got the insights. You know what happens. You're the custody sergeant and you've got no more cell space. There are laws governing, and they are good laws, because I don't know how much you know about what jails were like in previous eras, even in the Victorian era, but certainly you go back to the 17th century, the 18th century, they were hideous, truly, truly hideous. So the laws are there for good reason, and the custody sergeant knows that he cannot process anybody else. So if I turn up with you in handcuffs, that's not fair. If you turn up as a serving police officer and you've got me in handcuffs on suspicion of stealing the crown jewels, let's say, or I don't want to say a violent crime, but you're welcome to imagine one in your own head. You've got me there, banged to rights, on suspicion of stealing the crown jewels, and you've got no space because you've got convicted criminals, you've got prisoners in the custody cell. What happens next? What happens next? And literally to the person that you've collared and all the people who hear what's going on in the system and are of a criminal bent, what do they do? It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. Apparently, during my brief interlude at the beginning of the programme on the subject of Joe Biden's cognitive decline or his age-related fragility, apparently I came out with the immortal phrase, if you weren't listening tomorrow. That's quite relevant in a way, because I don't think, at least I hope, you wouldn't take that as evidence of something serious. And I now have to get to 1 o'clock without doing anything similar. But that's the Biden problem in like a pound shop version of the Biden problem, isn't it? If I was doing that every half an hour, every hour, if I was getting things mixed up and quite foolishly wrong, getting the time wrong, for example, or the day, forgetting the names of my colleagues, getting the name of the Prime Minister, calling Keir Starmer Rishi Sunak, then I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't last, would I? Eventually, I'd be taken to one side. They'd have a quiet word in my ear. So it's quite a good example there of the difference between an obvious misspeak and a symptom of a more serious problem. So if you weren't listening tomorrow, don't forget you can get the entire show on the Global Player app, where you can pause and rewind live radio. 10:33 is the time. Andy's in Chelmsford to steer us back to a breakdown in law and order. What would you like to say, Andy?
James, good programme as usual.
It's all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm a retired police officer, and I was a custody officer for a number of years.
Brilliant.
We've had this sort of stuff before.
Right.
When the prison officers were on strike, we used to have prisoners that were locked out of prisons.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And, yeah, they used to take up the sort of cell spaces with us.
But you knew that you knew that was for the duration of the prison officers' strike, as opposed to the new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you didn't know how long the strike was going to go on for, but
True.
Yes, it was only going to be whilst there was a strike. But I think the disadvantage you've got now is following austerity.
Yeah,
You've got a lot less police cells as well, because they shut down a lot of the smaller stations that had cells.
To my shame, Andy, I kind of missed that. I knew they were shutting stations, and I always came at it on the show from the community policing angle, and having a desk to report a crime to, and the way that the internet means that you don't need to do that anymore, or the mobile phone. But of course, every time you close a police station, you're closing cells, you're closing custody suites.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at that particular time in a station that had about 4 cells. It was only a small station.
Sure.
But we used to cover the jailers and that on overtime, and the custody officers, which we used to bill the Home Office for.
Right.
But we would have about 4 prisoners in. But the other thing as well is the prisoners then don't get their rights that they're entitled to in prison, things like association, visit,
of course,
stuff like that.
So what happens literally if I'm one of your colleagues, I turn up with a riot scrote in handcuffs,
yep,
and you're full, and you know for a fact, or at least the first 5 other police stations that you ring are full as well, because they've got prisoners coming back from court, having been sentenced to a prison sentence, and the prisons can't accept them, so they're coming back to the cut. What happens to the scrote in handcuffs?
Well, I mean, hopefully the control room will phone round or radio round all the different custodies to find out where's got space. But the trouble is that then means that somebody might be on a 50-mile journey to be able to be binned up.
And how? And who would be involved in that journey? 2 police officers. Oh yeah, minimum. Minimum and maximum. You'd have 2 police officers in the front of the car and the prisoner in the back. So they're out of the game for the for a 100-mile round journey.
Absolutely, and that's before you even start investigating the crime.
Or interviewing the suspect. And who's going to interview the suspect if he's 100 miles away or 50 miles away from the arresting officer's station? And the other thing is, those aren't going to be the only officers and suspects going to that station. So when they get there, they're probably about 4th or 5th in the queue anyway. Good grief. Austerity was wonderful, wasn't it? You really do. And for anyone just joining us, ex-custody officer, you really do see this as being a direct consequence of cuts to the police service. Absolutely. And I remember that speech Theresa May gave to the Federation, to the Police Federation, where she accused them of scaremongering when she suggested that cutting the number of police officers would cut the ability to solve crimes or cut the ability to catch crooks. We missed this bit. Have you been screaming at the television and the radio about this kind of thing in years past? We were screaming at the time. Yeah. Because what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen if you carry? It's like a bottle. and a tap, isn't it? And you hold the bottle under the tap and you don't turn the tap off and you don't swap the bottle. What is going to happen?
I mean, it's not helpful to sit there and say, we told you so,
no. But... Go on.
We told you so.
Andy, thank you. 10:37 is the time. I mean, it is extraordinary. I'm using that word a lot today, but consciously, remember, it's one of the words I'm trying to use a little bit less, so that when I do use it, it carries a little bit more weight. Look, Andy is one officer, albeit one with a lot of experience in exactly the right area of policing, but austerity is the reason he gives for this scenario. And he's got experience of this almost identical scenario, because if the prison officers are on strike and not accepting new prisoners, then the police stations assume a new role, except that that's not going to be an exceptional circumstance on the immediate horizon. It's going to be the normal. So now the question that we should have asked, or rather the question that is more obvious than the one that we have asked, becomes completely different. How do you feel about releasing prisoners early? It's not a question of how we feel. As far as I can tell, it's not a question of how we feel about releasing prisoners early, because we have no actual choice. The only question politically is in the horrible event of somebody being released after serving 40% of their sentence instead of 50% of their sentence, which is what happens now. And that's without parole getting involved. That's a sentence that automatically ends. You'll be on license and stuff, but you automatically cease to be incarcerated after serving half of your sentence. They're bringing that down. Shabana Mahmood will announce later today they're bringing that down from 50% to 40% for thousands of prisoners. Now, if one of them goes out and mugs an old lady or hurts someone, or God forbid worse, who's it going to be on? Is it going to be on the people that created the system that rendered the release of the prisoners inevitable? Or is it going to be on the people who release the prisoners? I don't know is the short answer to that. And in the great scheme of things, it doesn't matter, because we're trying to work out what this all looks like. Michael's in Westminster. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I served a prison sentence in 2014. I got 18 months. Right. I was sentenced at Southwark, got sent to Wandsworth.
Yeah.
And it was packed to the rafters. There was like 3 men in a one-man cell, which is inhumane. Yes. You can't swing a cat in a prison cell. But what happens is when you get sent to one of the local prisons, like Wandsworth, you get to be risk assessed. And there's 4 categories, Category A, Category B, Category C, Category D, D being the lowest. I was risk assessed as being D because it was a low-risk offence.
Right.
But because the prisons were so full in the open prisons, because that's where they would have sent me,
yes,
I had to stay at Wandsworth for 6 months in a Category B prison. I eventually got to an open prison at Ford, and when you get an open prison, you can work in the community 5 days a week. You get home leave 5 days a month, and you get town visits every weekend. So my suggestion is to free up the prison spaces immediately. Is all those on Category D, which is basically the lowest risk, put them on tag, HDC, home detention curfew. Put them all on tag except for lifers or sexual offenders. But the rest were already risk assessed as being low risk, and we're already going home once a month. We're working in the community. That would free up thousands of spaces at just one fell swoop, which would allow Category D prisoners to progress to open prisons and free up the spaces.
Well, except that the open prisons are full as well already.
That's what I mean. So put everyone who's low risk in the open prisons, put them on HDC, put them on
so
tag.
Send them home. Well, we don't know the detail of what they're actually going to do, but the plan here is about 5,000 will be released under whatever it is, specifically that Shabana Mahmood announces earlier today. While I have you, Michael,
yeah,
did it? What purpose did your prison sentence serve in the great scheme of things?
I'll be honest with you, it didn't serve anything. It would have been harder. It would have been more punishment for me to be given a community service order.
How come?
And because it didn't serve putting me in custody. It would have been greater to put me to help the community, to teach them about, because I own my own business, to teach them how to maybe set up your own business and raising finance. Putting me in custody didn't serve anything, in my opinion. It would have been better to put my skills to use to serve the community.
Well, did it not reduce the likelihood of you reoffending?
Yes, it did, but also giving me a community order would have been just as effective.
Would it? Can I ask what
you
did, or do you not want to tell me?
Yeah, I committed mortgage fraud.
Okay. So what, mortgage fraud?
Yeah.
And then 18 months or out after 9. I mean, that is, you can't obviously treat financial crime lightly, but the idea that prison sentence served any rehabilitative or social purpose is, as you point out, just not true.
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. But the funny thing you're saying that, James, at trial, most of the witnesses blamed the financial institutions for their lax underwriting.
For their lack of scrutiny.
Yeah, for their lack of scrutiny. So, they didn't.
Same problem, isn't it? We're running out of what is it they say? Quis ipsos custodiet or something like that. We're running out of custodians, clearly, and we're running out of custody as well. Thank you, Michael. You cover a lot of ground there, but the wisdom of punishing people with prison sentences is questionable. This is something Alex Chalk has talked about, former Tory minister in this space. It's something James Timpson is very clear on, that the number of people locked up who shouldn't be locked up. When you look at the prevalence of, for example, learning difficulties and specifically illiteracy among the prison population, particularly the recidivist prison population, the returning prisoners, the reoffenders, a category into which Michael clearly hopefully doesn't fit, then the not fit for purpose of the entire system becomes clear. But that's not an answer to the short-term current problem, nor is it an answer to the question of what actually happens, what physically, legally, socially happens, what happens on our streets in the event of there being nowhere to put convicted prisoners. And Michael telling us there's already 3 people in a room designed for 1. Which is why I gave Munir a very polite, shortish shrift at the top of the show, because the idea that, we'll always find somewhere, I don't think that works anymore. I think they've already done that. They've reached the point where you have custody vehicles queuing up outside custody buildings in the same way that you have ambulances queuing up outside hospitals. 14 years. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:47, and a surprising number of you. Well, it's not actually a surprising number of you. What is surprising is that it hadn't occurred to me sooner. That's not even surprising. That's a bit self-aggrandizing. It's a bit embarrassing that loads of you have seen something that I hadn't seen until you pointed it out to me. Can you guess what it is? An awful lot of contributors suggesting that this might be why Rishi Sunak called that election unexpectedly early, taking his own side by more surprise, it seemed, than the opposition. And, as the dust settles and the post-mortems continue, an awful lot of senior Tories are arguing publicly now, or stating rather publicly now, that they wished he hadn't gone so soon. But they didn't know about this. Maybe he did. It makes something of a mockery of the Daily Mail front page, doesn't it? Their attempt to sort of argue that Labour is deliberately inventing the problem, where everyone we've spoken to today, even adjacent to, never mind associated with the issue, doesn't even entertain for a moment the notion that this isn't actually true. But listen, what do you do? I told you this was fascinating me. I told you this would fascinate me moving forward. What do you do? And it's not just newspapers. The same will be true of broadcasters. If you were shilling for this lot from the start, if you were waving through or even cheering or ignoring all the lies, all the corruption, all the dishonesty, the moral depravity, the assault upon parliamentary standards, or the absolute contempt for the ministerial code, if you were doing all of that and pretending, or not even pretending, arguing that Liz Truss was some sort of economic genius, what do you do now? I mean, I've got challenges. I've got to slightly recalibrate on this. In the event of Keir Starmer trying to get some anonymous donor to pay for his wallpaper, I'll know exactly how to behave. But in the event of the Labour government actually abiding by all of the standards and codes that have evolved over the decades, evolved over the centuries, what on earth are we going to get angry about together on the programme? But what do you do if you've waved through all of the stuff that has created a system in which ambulances are queuing up outside hospitals and prison vans are queuing up outside police stations and prisons? I guess if you're the editor of the Daily Mail or the Times or the Telegraph, you just have to sort of carry on lying. Labour accused of scare tactics over full jails. It's simple to solve. Are they full? Why? Lisa is in Liss in Hampshire. Lisa in Liss, that's nice. Lisa, what made you pick up the phone?
You have to forgive me if I go off on a bit of a rant.
Fill your boots. You're being good company.
I felt very passionate about this for a long time. My brother has been in and out of prison since I was about 12, and I'm now 35. He went on a small charge. Got caught with drugs, as you've said before, when you were a bit naughty at school. As I know, my other half, he's got a good job. He, smoked some weed at school, things like that. And he ended up in this vicious cycle of getting let out, put into a hostel, getting into harder drugs, and then getting better, and then going back into prison. And it's just been a vicious cycle for the last God knows how many years.
Oh, dear.
And the main thing that happened is the last time he came out last year, he got a recall back into prison for missing a probation appointment because he missed the bus.
Wow.
And because he had left, he was working. He always manages to get a job. He's really good at labouring, carpet fitting. He really tries, and I know I'm probably biased.
Well, of course you are, but you're also telling us the truth.
I
mean, there'll always be a story, won't there? But if you miss the bus and you miss an appointment, that's
because he
not
was working.
Yeah, okay.
And it's just so frustrating that he goes through this every time, and there must be a simpler way to.
And this is James Timpson's job. This isn't going to solve the problem of the next 6 weeks, is it? But this is where, when Streeting talks about the health service being broken, and we talk about the prison service or the prison estate or law and order, it's not that this lot haven't got the job of tinkering at the edges, have they? They've got the job of reviewing root and branch reform to mean that to look at the situation in which your brother is currently taking up a prison space. Yeah,
with no need to.
Because he missed the bus. Because he missed the bus.
Absolutely no need. He will always be in that system now. I hate to say it, and it hurts to say it, but he will always be in the system now.
Why?
Because he doesn't... sort of part of me is institutionalised, so he's almost waiting for it to happen again. We're almost waiting.
But is he addicted to drugs? Does he have an addiction?
No, he was. He unfortunately, probably about 10 years ago, went into a hostel where he got past what he thought was a spliff, and it had heroin, and then he got hooked on heroin.
Right.
And then that went down a further path. He's now come off of that, been off of that for a good few years now, put more weight on, went into the gym in prison, and always had a job, which I know sounds silly, but he's sort of he rises above in every time he's in there, sort of thing. But it's just a waste. It's a waste of someone who's going to come out and work.
And obviously it's not working. The more he goes back, the more evidence you have that the last sentence hasn't worked as a deterrent. Eventually he'll just give up the effort. Yeah,
because to him it's just jail. It doesn't, I mean, but when he was younger and he got put away for, say, 9 months for a petty-ish crime, with being caught with weed, he was put in a cell at one point with someone who'd murdered a child, and he was so scared that he was like, what do? You have to pretend to be tough and he was put in an A-class prison full of murderers and rapists, and you can't mix. I think it was a good couple of months ago you had someone on who he'd waited ages and ages, and he got sentenced for a couple of months, and then he lost his job. He lost everything after. The system is just completely broken, and it's just getting worse.
That word there, broken, is popping up again and again and again and again. Lisa, I wish him well, I really do, and at least he's got a clearly devoted sister in his life, which must make whatever other problems he has a little less. But goodness me, tough for you as well, of course. 10:55, and to watch it happen like a sort of slow motion car crash, metaphorically speaking, to know exactly what's going to happen next, because the system as it stands is geared towards friendly front pages from right-wing newspapers. How on earth can you end up with a Home Secretary standing up in front of the Police Federation and telling them that their scaremongering overcuts to the police service? And then she ends up Prime Minister. James is in Sheffield. James, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
You mentioned earlier about the breakdown of law and order, and it could happen. I think it is happening. We've all seen the clips on social media of gangs of youths with the faces covered walking into Tesco Express.
Shoplifting, just
walking out with and whether walking into department stores, taking bunches of clothing with impunity. They know that nothing's going to happen. So the looting's happening now. The prisons are full. Low level crime. Like your last caller said, breach of probation for missing the bus. It needs to be on a case by case basis. There's got to be it's a multi approach. There needs to be.
You sound like you're in the system in some capacity.
I'm a police officer.
How does this change your life? I mean, because is there any room here for scepticism or fear of exaggeration when they say there are 700 places left, and if that figure comes below 300, then you've described the edges of a breakdown in law and order. It would be of an entirely different magnitude if that happened. Is there any part of you that goes, yeah, all right, calm down, we've been here before, or is this all completely kosher as far as you're concerned?
It's absolutely kosher, but there is things in place. There is a standard operation in place to free up to use police cells, which, as one of your previous callers said, has been used before. But capacity is limited. It's not what it was 15 years ago. Some of those police stations are still mothballed. They're probably used for storing the storerooms now, but they're not Home Office compliant. It's CCTV. The decor's not been maintained. So whether there's the opportunity to bring some of those urgently back online and utilised.
So I've had former police officers and serving police officers all pointing towards that programme of cuts to your profession being being the biggest contributor to what we're talking about today.
Policing always is the service of last resort, where when everything else fails, it comes to the police, whether it's whether it's prison, whether it's mental health services or the NHS, and it's contributed to us not being able to deal with crime. We've dealt with other social issues instead of that, and then we've been criticised for not dealing with crime. So we get all that, and we're at the point where there is no capacity left within policing anymore to do the urgent stopgap of preventing these things happening.
So, final question, I promise, because I'm sure you're busy. Among your colleagues, what would be the broad response to what is expected to be announced later today? So I forget precisely what the technical term is, but that reduction from 50% release to 40% release, what will the average copper have to say about that?
Total demoralisation. If you're letting a prolific burglar out, and let's be honest about it, for low-level, non-violent offences, it's rare that you do go to prison now.
Right.
They're going to come out and they're going to commit more crime, and they will go back in again, and the cycle will just continue.
Which is incredibly demoralising. But is there any, in the current context, is there any alternative?
No, absolutely not.
So you can have two thoughts in your head at the same time. It's a crying shame, but it is an inevitability, an inevitable consequence of the context in which we all find ourselves as a country. James, thank you. Thank you to all my callers this hour, actually, and all the ones who couldn't get on. That notion of, as you've said, it's basically asset stripping, says Jamie, but I know exactly what you mean. You cut and cut and cut and cut and cut while the sun shines, as it were, and then it starts raining and you haven't got a roof or it's full of holes. You see, does that work as an explanation? You don't notice the extent of the consequences of austerity until you need the things that have gone. And that is true of hospitals, it's true of prisons now, police. It's true of almost every corner of our society. Which makes the child benefit story quite pertinent, doesn't it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11, and it is time for Sir Keir Starmer's first little local difficulty, because it is reported this morning in one of the proper newspapers, not one of the propaganda sheets, that he faces potential rebellion on the issue of the two-child benefit cap, which is a benefit under which, if you earn below a certain amount, if your household income is below a certain amount, then you receive a certain amount of state support, family benefit for your first and second child. But regardless of how little money you earn, you get no money at all for subsequent children, for third, fourth, fifth, sixth child. It is one of the areas in which Keir Starmer has been ruthlessly pragmatic, or a blue Labour politician, depending on your perspective. He has talked about wanting to get rid of it while recognising that he can't, because the calls upon the public purse are myriad. So, what do we think? About 1.5 million children across the UK are affected by this policy. In other words, that there are about 1.5 million children whose parents don't, excuse me, you can tell I'm having a little drink of water. I've got a little tickle in the back of my throat. That they get nothing. I couldn't even tell you how much it is, actually, at the moment, child benefit. It's a good job I'm not a politician being interviewed by Nick Ferrari. He'd have bounced me around the studio by now for not knowing that. Especially if it was actually part of my brief. The reason I like this story in terms of our conversation, I'm not one for if you can't have children, if you can't afford children, don't have them. I just talk to anybody who is currently framing the thought, if you can't afford children, don't have them. I just recognise that you exist, and I sympathise enormously with your cognitive dysfunction. But it just isn't helpful in the context of a conversation about a civilization or about a civilized country. You know, today's children are tomorrow's grown-ups. The more comfortable a child's experience of childhood, the less likely the prisons are to subsequently become full. The biggest driver of crime in any community is poverty. And therefore, the more children that grow up in poverty, the more likely they are to become, or the more adults you have who end up in criminality. So, and also health, the health burden of poverty is huge and potentially lifelong. So if you are driven entirely by financial concerns rather than basic instincts like compassion and decency, then having children not growing up in poverty in the long term costs the country less than having children growing up in poverty. So your tax doesn't then have to go to address their incarceration or their journey through the justice system or the consequences of their lack of education or the consequences of their poor diet or their difficult upbringing. Our tax money is saved by ensuring that children don't grow up in poverty. About 440,000 families are affected by this cap. That's up on last year. About 1.6 million children are disadvantaged by it. That's up by about 100,000 on last year. But, and this is where the reason why people reach so easily for the more callous or cynical analyses, people are still having children. So if you have 2 children and you are thinking of having a third child, you know that you will not get the benefit for that child of £25.60 a week for child 1 and £42.55 for child 2. So it's not a tiny amount, is it? It's not a tiny amount. Mark points out that the people who come up with the lines, I beg your pardon, Andrew points out the people who are in favour of the cap are also the same people who are anti-immigration, which demonstrates a deep misunderstanding of our looming demographic crisis. But that's a subject to which we will return on another day. It's a subject to which we will discuss today as well, but it's not the beginning and the end of the conversation. The Tories brought it in, and I looking at the dates, it kicked in, didn't it, in April of 2017, but it was a George Osborne policy, this. He's a man who's got away with murder, isn't he? We talk a lot about how Cameron doesn't get properly held to account for his role in what we are still talking about every day, and will be for probably the best part of this parliament, if not longer, that the way things were broken. Prisons today, hospitals earlier in the week, schools in some ways, although not all, physically falling down, schools. Not necessarily George Osborne's fault, but of course the shutting of community centres, of Sure Start centres, the ripping out of anything that remotely resembled community and sacrificing it upon the altar of so-called austerity. The consequences of all of that will be with us for the rest of our lives, even as some of those consequences get reversed. That we will be with them they will be with us for most of our lives. And yet no one ever really talks about George Osborne in that context. No one really talks about them. So you don't lose all your benefits if you have a third child. You still get it for child 1 and 2. I hope that's clear. There's one text has come in which suggests it wasn't necessarily, but you don't get the third. Now, I just want to know what you think about this and why. I don't want to get on a political soapbox particularly. I think that explanation of the economics is necessary and important, and I think that the nod towards immigration is important as well, because you can have one or the other. You can either encourage people who are already here to have more children, or you can encourage people who are not here to come here and do the jobs that would otherwise be done by the adults that the children who you've had grow up to be. The idea that you actually have a cap on both, you try and limit immigration. Some Tories boasting about a drop in visa applications, which is extraordinary because the visa applications are specifically for jobs that need to be filled. You can only apply for a visa if you want to work in a sector that has got a dispensation from other immigration policies, because that sector is crying out for staff. James Cleverly yesterday, probably, to be fair to the man, doesn't understand why it is such a ridiculous position to adopt. But if you're boasting about a decline in visa applications, you're essentially claiming that we should celebrate staff shortages in the care sector, or the construction industry, or agriculture. Yes, fewer people are coming here to work in sectors that are crying out for staff. High five, everybody. So if a former Home Secretary can be that daft, then it's not a mark of great shame for an ordinary voter to be that daft. But I just want to know what you think about it, what you think about the principle. Sadiq Khan changed my mind about something not long ago when he brought back free school meals for everybody, for every primary school child in the United Kingdom. And the way he explained it, as someone who I think was on free school meals as a child, well, I was at the exact opposite end of that spectrum. He just talked about the beauty of a universal benefit, because it's a great leveller. Even when the people who don't need it get it, it speaks to a sort of society in which we all look out for each other. So no child is stigmatised by the need for free school meals, but equally, no child's parent feels penalised for earning enough money that their child doesn't need a free school meal. It's like free milk, which I think Margaret Thatcher took away. It was just something, things that treat us, things that the government does that treat us all identically. I didn't understand the power of that. I always thought that it was beholden upon people like me to say, well, I don't need it, therefore why should I have it? You saw some elderly celebrities doing it with the winter allowance, the cold weather allowance, and saying, well, we don't need it. But that's what society should do. The safety net is half of the welfare state. The other half of the welfare state is what's the best analogy? So the safety net is what you fall into. If you trip off the trapeze of life, if you trip off the tightrope of life, the safety net is there to catch you. So that would be unemployment benefit. But what would child benefit for people who don't need it be? It would be a relationship, wouldn't it? A symbiotic relationship between state and citizen. It would be, I mean, in the olden days, it was, here is some money for mum in case dad drinks it all on Friday night down the pub. Here is some money that mum can get from the post office every Tuesday, because otherwise, if she's in a marriage where the money doesn't filter down, doesn't trickle down, who's going to feed the children or who's going to buy their clothes? So it became a sort of form of housekeeping, in which case the decision to put a cap on the number of children that are eligible for it looks evil, because the dad who doesn't give money to mum, if they've got 5 kids, is a much more negligent and unpleasant character than the dad who doesn't give money to mum who's got 1 kid. So those 3 kids that don't qualify for any money at all 5 of them are going to suffer. And that's the other element of it that I don't like, is that all the children suffer. So the 3rd child, the 4th child, take money from the mouths of the 1st and 2nd child. But I can also see the argument that you shouldn't get anything from the state for nothing, in which case you're going to have to be calling for much, much higher wages. And again, the kind of people that don't like higher wages are the same kind of people that don't like immigration and don't like a cap on child benefit. It's a mess, right, morally speaking, which is why I'm not going in hard on a particular perspective here. I just want to know what you think about it. 0345 6060 973. And crucially, I want to know what it's done. What has it done? Because this is a policy that you can properly analyse by weighing it up against what happened before. It's not theoretical. What has it done to families? What has it done to your family? What has it done to people you know? If you worked in the system, what did you see? What impact did it have? And as a consequence of your experiences and your understandings, would you answer this question? The most obvious question is, should Labour get rid of it? There is a significant backbench rebellion growing, attempts to force a vote on the 2-child benefit cap, which Labour rebels hope would bounce Keir Starmer into a concession. Do you want that to happen? Either on a point of principle or as a consequence of your experience and understanding, all right? The 2-child benefit cap. In 21st century Britain, should it be in place or should it be erased? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:17, and there's a prize for the best analogy on this one. The prize is my eternal gratitude. So I've always seen the welfare state as a safety net. But elements of it are not safety net. Elements of it are something else. The things that you benefit from, even not in times of crisis. The sort of permanent benefit. The benefits you get when you're on the tightrope of life, as opposed to the benefits that you get. And this is big B and small b, when you fall off and land in the safety net. And that's where I think the 2-child benefit cap comes in. So I'm going to read this first from John, and then we'll go to Jenny, who's in Bristol. Because I respect the way that you've expressed yourself, John, while simultaneously finding your idea not ridiculous, but wrong. I have neighbours who don't work and have 5 kids. They also don't do anything to keep their lovely house tidy, which is given to them by society. These adults have grown up assuming they will be looked after by society without needing to give back. That attitude needs retraining. Investment in schools and work apprenticeships to give these people purpose and goals is required to break the cycle. Possibly, but you find one family that is treating the safety net as a trampoline or a hammock. It in no way justifies getting rid of the safety net for all the people who need it and are using it responsibly and will be in it briefly before climbing back up the ladder to the tightrope above. So that's why I don't like that rhetoric. But I'm certainly not going to be rude to you, because you've expressed yourself compassionately and caringly. Some people will always choose to treat the safety net as a hammock. But what does the 2-child benefit cap do to a society. Jenny's in Bristol. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I have got a lot of experience in respect for this. At the time that the Tory party implemented this policy, I was working on an advisory group to the DWP.
Right.
On behalf of ethnic minority groups. And this policy was a knee-jerk reaction to, at the time, all the headlines in the right-wing press about council, about 9-bedroom houses in Islington going to asylum seekers, etc., etc. So there was a huge determination to address this issue. And from our perspective, we saw it as it's very likely that ethnic minority groups have 2+ children. So we worked with CGAP, who did a JR on this. And unfortunately, because the DWP's own impact assessment had recognised that this would disproportionately affect ethnic minority groups, it was allowed. It was allowed to go through. So it was challenged, but challenged went no.
Disproportionate being the key word. Do we know what impact it had? I mean, because it saved money in the short term. My contention would be that it costs a lot more in the long term.
I'm personally involved with the impact it had. I felt so aggrieved that this was allowed to happen, because the women we were dealing with were women who had escaped violent relationships and were in hiding. So I launched a social enterprise called Mum's Chef. Sorry for the plug.
That's all right.
Because I didn't look at what they couldn't do. I looked at what they could do. And we worked with these women, and we saved 100 women from a particular borough in London, from being moved to Coventry, being moved away from their families, their kids being moved at critical stages in their education, because it was the only way they could not afford that they could afford to live with their kids was by going to another borough,
right?
As far as Coventry,
and the third and fourth child benefit would have changed that. Would have been.
Absolutely, because you get a certain percentage in your whole benefit.
Yeah.
You get child benefits you'll get a housing allowance for child 1, 2, 3 and 4. But once 3 and 4 was taken away, you were running in deficits. So you were accruing rental deficits and being threatened with eviction.
So it's the margins, isn't it? It's. I mean, sometimes I think it's difficult for people to get their head around how small the margins are. That old Mr. McCorber line. It can be. So this policy for some families, and the reason why they delayed bringing it in is so that there wasn't a cliff edge introduced for people. But it is the difference between being able to.
I don't know that they did delay bringing it in. We were working...
well, they did, because it came in 2017, and it was George Osborne's idea, and he was long gone by then.
No, it got reduced from 26,000, the cap, from 26,000 to 23 in 2017, but it was implemented in 2010. And that's when I started this semi-movement, which... I got support from my borough, my council, to help these women. I got so much support from corporate sponsors. We were flying as an organisation because I was proving that we not only can get these women into work, but we can sustain their employment. Their main challenge was English.
And so it hits them particularly hard. The Conservatives introduced, just for the avoidance of confusion, a policy limiting universal credit or child tax credit to a family's first 2 children. Any third or subsequent children born after April the 6th, 2017 are not eligible. So either the practicalities or the moralities of this one, I think. Shabire is in Great Harwood. Shabire, what would you like to say?
I'd like, I want to say the opposite to the text you read out. I understand that individuals in this country are abusing the system and they should be held accountable. I get that. But if I give you my own personal experience, I mean, I'm 63 now, and I've been in this country for 54 years.
Yeah.
I've been working since the age of 16. I got married late at 56. I've got 3 lovely kids, 5, 3, and 2.
Crikey.
Okay, the eldest gets her child benefit and the second gets hers. But that's our lifeline for the children.
Mm.
It isn't. I mean, I'm unemployed now, and I can't find a job, although I'm a professional, got qualifications. But the thing is, why, this benefit cap should not be discriminatory towards children. Why is it? It's discrimination.
So the idea that, and Gary and Anik takes up this point, you're telling the third child that they are worth less than the first 2, or that mum and dad shouldn't have had them.
Correct.
That is how you feel.
On the other hand, the government wants you to produce children because there's not enough children in the country.
However, there'll be people listening, and it's a logical position, who would say you knew 2 years ago that your third child would not be eligible for this particular benefit, and you cracked on anyway.
I cracked on anyway. I'm not saying that I should. What I'm trying to say is the system should not discriminate against children. Okay, they need that life, especially if you're in the net of the system of unemployment. And I mean, my kids. I mean, the eldest goes to school. If she needs shoes or uniform, that's where the money goes.
And the question of unemployment is crucial to this, isn't it? Because some of the rhetoric seems to completely ignore the fact that surprises happen. Things happen to us that we weren't expecting and didn't want. A period of unemployment, illness, turnaround, all of these things.
Absolutely.
So when you had your third child or your fourth child, you were doing great. And 5 years down the line, you're not doing great, and that you get punished for having that third child.
When we had the second child, I was actually on the front line managing COVID sites.
Gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we had things were okay, but when COVID stopped and the work stopped, then I was unemployed.
You make a really good point. I like that word. Well, I mean, I don't like it, but I'm glad you've introduced the word discrimination into the conversation, because it does feel like that. I don't think, Rob also on the numbers says the first child essentially gets double what the second child gets. I don't see it like that, because there'll be a lot of stuff you buy for the first child that also applies for the second child, not just in terms of hand-me-downs, but in terms of infrastructure, in terms of pushchairs and cots and things like that. So I don't think that is discrimination, if that's what you're suggesting. What do you do if the second-born are twins? Is that anomaly? Is that being accommodated by this system, or not? It probably hasn't, has it? Because what difference does it make? John's in it. What if you have triplets? John's in Ivy Bridge. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, John.
Well, my kids are grown up now, but so 15 years ago, argument's sake, we had our third child, so all of them were under 6, and my wife couldn't work after getting postnatal depression, which she's over now, so, everything's good in that sense.
But it was bad at the time.
It was bad at the time. It meant she couldn't work, and the getting child benefit for all 3 of them really made a difference on living on my salary and paying the mortgage and everything else.
Yes.
Now we are older and earning more, and the kids are all grown up. They're in their late teens, early 20s now. I would happily pay a bit more tax. I know. To
help out people like you
who were like
at the other end of the telescope, the ones beginning it now.
I'm a wokey lefty, snowflake. So
not really. You've just had an experience of an unexpected bump in the road, and recognise the role that society plays in insulating all of us potentially from some of the impact. How often, John, if you don't mind me asking, how often do you feel that a lot of the people in charge, and I don't think this would apply to the Labour rebels seeking to get the cap lifted, but it may apply to some of their better-heeled colleagues in their own party, and it may appeal to some of the people on the other side of the House of Commons. But how often do you feel that people have no idea the difference a relatively small amount of money can make to a family?
I think it is. I think it is hidden, isn't it?
Yeah.
In many ways. I mean, my wife's a teacher,
right,
and she works in a school in an area that is fairly, there's quite a high level of send and all of those sort of things. Kids in school, and the kids are really struggling. She's been teaching now for 30 years, getting on for, right. And she's really noticed in the last 5 years or so, we're going back to sort of 70s type of kids with smelly clothes and knackered shoes and not having pens and not having breakfast and not being able to concentrate because they've not had any sleep and all of those things that you've discussed ad infinitum in the past.
Are rising. They're on the rise, and that can't be a coincidence. This would be a part of it. This would be a contributing factor. This policy since 2017 would be very much a contributor to that, because it's about how much there is to go round. Thank you, John. So total $25.60 for the eldest child, and then in total, and then $42 in total for the second child. So the second child is getting about a tenner less than the first one, but then nothing for subsequent children. And you can see why they did it, and you can see how it got waved through. This is the media that greeted Liz Truss's fiscal event as the finest budget they'd ever seen. What did Farage call it? He called it the best budget since 1986 or something. Daily Mail saying, finally a true Tory budget. Daily Telegraph, this is the best budget of my lifetime. So those are the people that cheered this stuff on. They're clearly all crackers, but you can see how it happened. And yet, when you come to count the cost of it, you surely would accept that it is one of those expenditures that Starmer should be prioritising a little more highly. 11:31 is the time. John, what a lovely call. Thank you. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:35. How many people would opt out? Not of this one, because it's already means tested, but Tony in Enfield says, make the winter fuel allowance for pensioners optional so that you can opt out if you want to. I would, and I'd be delighted to see that money diverted towards the child benefit cap being, the two-child benefit cap being abolished. I don't know, really. I don't actually like the means testing, oddly. And I mean, obviously I'm on the wrong side of it, but that's not the reason why. The reason I don't like the means testing on things like this is because of the cliff edge that it introduces and the anomalies as well. So you could have two people earning 49 grand a year. I'm going to get the numbers wrong. Sorry, I should check this stuff before I come on air, shouldn't I? But you could have two people earning 49 grand a year, earning 101 grand a year between them, who wouldn't get it, and a bloke over the road who's on 99. No, I've forgotten why I find that anomalous. Let me just have a little think about that and get back to you. 11:36 is the time. The main reason that I don't like the means testing element of it is because of the threshold. Wherever you put the threshold, it's going to be horribly unfair on the person who is just over it. I know it's staggered a bit, but whoever is just above a threshold is going to feel horribly aggrieved when they look at the person who is just below the threshold. And that's why means testing in some areas is unhelpful. And that I like the idea of when you're a tightrope walker, and you have a pole that helps you balance. Is that the best analogy for this type of benefit? So the welfare state provides a safety net. We are all tightrope walkers, all of us. And the welfare state, as envisioned by Clement Attlee and Aneurin Bevan and all the great godfathers of the modern labour movement, the safety net is there to catch us when we fall. The state also provides the ladders and the doctors to treat us if we've hurt ourselves, if that's the reason why we've fallen off the tightrope. But some benefits should be designed to help us while we're on the tightrope. Do you see what I mean? Not simply to respond to the crisis, the hopefully temporary crisis. We need to acknowledge also that for some people, the safety net will be permanent through no choice of theirs. They will be rendered in permanent need. They could be born in permanent need of the safety net. So it's not just a stage in the process of lifting people back up again. It has to be comfortable enough to accommodate people who will be there for most of their lives or all of their lives in the case of some disabilities and the attendant benefits on that. We have to acknowledge, sounds like a political speech this, doesn't it? We have to acknowledge, conference, also that some people will choose to languish in what is for the rest of us a safety net because their horizons are so limited, their aspirations are so few that they elect to treat the safety net like a hammock or even perhaps a trampoline. But we don't get rid of the safety net for the millions of people that need it as a way or as a consequence of the existence of people who are in it that don't necessarily need it. And we're back to all of the usual tabloid stories about your friend's cousin's window cleaner who's got 48 children and a palace in Westminster. But the other bit of this that I haven't articulated properly in the past is what you get at the top, what you get when you're on the tightrope to help you be safer, to help you navigate the tightrope more effectively, to make your life easier, more enjoyable, more pleasurable. So in a way, that pole that you see tightrope walkers carrying, that helps them balance out the left and the right, as it were, and reduces the likelihood of them falling off the tightrope, that's the category into which the abolition of the two-child benefit cap would fall. Your pole becomes more effective. I nearly said bigger, but I don't know enough about tightrope walking to know whether or not the size of your pole makes an enormous difference to it, because there must come a point where it's too big, mustn't there? I presume, but you know what I'm talking about. That's the point, and I think that's what society, like a guardrail, if you prefer. That's a nice suggestion from Dan. It's like a guardrail. It's there. Some people will fall over the guardrail. Admittedly, it wouldn't be much fun watching a tightrope walker if they had a guardrail. But that idea of a benefit that is not designed to help you when you're in trouble, temporary trouble, it's designed to make society a nicer place to be. And having a third child or a fourth child seems to me to be something that you shouldn't be effectively punished for in comparison to what happens if you have one or two children. Your third, I mean, I don't imagine you have conversations with your kids about it. I don't like you because I don't get any money for you. But you're all right. I get 25 quid a week for you, and you're in second. I get another 16 quid a week for you. 20 to 12 is the time. So what's the social, what's the political, philosophical impact of this? And I guess that notion of the £3 to £3.5 billion it would cost to scrap it has to be taken into account as well. Brad's in Lambeth. Brad, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you? You well?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good. I'm a little bit, I notice, younger than some of the callers you've had on, but I certainly still have an opinion on this. Good. And it's opinion that's kind of based in my own personal experience. But what I really want to say is I'm very concerned with the message this sends to young people in this country. I'm talking about the youngest and the most vulnerable people in this country, the ones that are in need of the benefit.
Well, the third child in a family that is struggling financially. And of course, in the way that the conversation is set up, we think that third child suffers more. But of course, all three of those children now suffer as a consequence of the arrival of the third child without any attendant increase in family income.
Well, they do, but they're also sometimes need to be, and I understand sometimes people get very sick of ideology inserting itself into politics, but sometimes you do have to stand back and say, actually, what is this saying, and what real tangible impact is this having? Yeah. I'll give you an example. My mum was one of those people who, she was a single mother. She worked very hard, and by a lot of statistics, we wouldn't have been badly off. However, we were always, I suppose, there was a sense of just getting by. So, yes, I was much more fortunate than a lot of people that are in need of the benefit cap. But that's why this is so concerning, because even then we had a government in Blair and Brown who showed the compassion, upon reflection in that time, 2003 I was born, and introduced child tax credit. And I had a discussion with Mum the other day about how much tremendously that impacts her get by month to month. No doubt that would have had an impact on me getting where I am today. And you know,
but that's the point we miss, isn't it? That's why it's such a mealy-mouthed policy, because it misses the point that the more
it really
comfortable your childhood, the more likely the success of your adulthood. And success being a very broad term, but we both know what we're talking about.
Of course.
If you're skint, or if you're struggling, if you're hungry, or if you're poorly clothed, or whatever it may be, if you're cold,
absolutely.
all of these things.
It's just that there's a real human impact, and I think that I think that the taxpayer, because there's a lot of talks about the taxpayer, and I left school at 18 with no qualifications to get me a job, and I worked very hard in the startup space in London, and I've paid taxes, a lot of taxes for those 3 years, and so I'm a taxpayer. So it's not as if I'm one of these people that are saying, you know, that you hear on the right there. But to get back to the point, really, is just that, look, I think that people have empathy and they don't want to begrudge these people, these young children, of benefits. We're not evil. And so we must look and say, where else can we economise? The Tories wasted how much on this? PPC and whatever, you know, is there not...
Dig the money. It's still going to be $3 billion a year, so it's a bit more than just sort of looking down the back of the sofa. But I agree with you, it's about more than that. It is about what we stand for as a society. And speaking of tax, I like this. Brad, thank you. I like this from Dean. I'm 60. I've never had children, but I've always supported paying child-related taxes because those kids will become the medical, teaching, emergency services of the future, the staff that wider society depends on. I always reach for that as well, Dean, the kind of emotional examples, but there'll also be the shop workers and the road sweepers and the accountants and the not just the emergency services or the public services, they will be the society, the entire society of the future. So with child benefit, he goes on, and the 2-child cap, I wonder whether you make it means tested beyond the first two so that the most needy get it, but the wealthiest don't. Look, it's preferable to what we've currently got. But I like the idea of a universal benefit because it is a guardrail for the whole of society, and it equalises us. It levels us up, to use a redundant phrase that's now been removed from the political vocabulary. It equalises us. I used to think people like me shouldn't get it. And for the record, I don't. I used to think people like me shouldn't get it. But actually, as with free school meals, something that makes everybody feel the same is good for everybody. I think, at least. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47. And, of course, taxes as well. So if you're a third child now, you will be paying my pension in 20 years' time, right? So the state making your life a little better now is almost an investment in the taxpayer that you will become. I don't know. Maybe I'm being very, very naive. But I certainly think once you remove the, if you can't afford them, don't have children, once you remove that lazy rhetoric from the conversation, it becomes a lot more interesting, doesn't it? Full disclosure's on a bit of a roll at the moment. I appreciate I'm showing my age with some of the guests that I get most excited about, but I'm having such a lovely time in the company of people that I've always admired, and in some cases even more than admired. Because of the general election, we didn't play out a clip of last week's Full Disclosure with Midge, formerly, of course, of Slick and most famously Ultravox. Also, and we talked a bit about this as well, with Bob Geldof, the kind of godfathers of Band-Aid and Live Aid and the co-writer of Do They Know It's Christmas. We had such a lovely chat. But as always with Full Disclosure, I focus on the bits we may not know about, or at least the life of a public figure before they became a public figure. And I mean, proper fans will know about this little bit of Midge's story, but I don't think everybody will. We've skipped a bit. That I didn't know, which was the year before you had this number one. You turned down the chance to be, and I did a double take when I read this, to be the lead vocalist of the Sex Pistols.
If it was lead vocalist.
Yeah.
I'll never know.
Right, but Malcolm McLaren made you an offer you could refuse.
I did refuse, yeah. I mean, the reality is, I was coming out of Glasgow, a music shop in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And back in the day, our management at that point owned what became the Glasgow Apollo.
Right.
The big venue there. And when bands would come to the Glasgow Apollo and find that their amplifiers weren't working or whatever, you couldn't just call up a rental company and have something delivered to replace it. They didn't exist. So they used to send people round to McCormack's, the Glasgow guitar shop, and say, Midge will be there. He's always there. You know, he's always trading and buying guitars and doing whatever. And I thought this English guy stopping me coming out the shop was about this. He
What's
said,
an amplifier?
looking to borrow a guitar or something, you know. And the guy who stopped me turned out to be Bernie Rhodes, who went on to manage The Clash. And his friend round the corner, sitting in this beat-up old Cortina or whatever, was Malcolm McLaren, who was a very odd sight to behold in Glasgow in 1975 or whatever. And he proceeded to tell me about his shop in Vivian Westwood, and he used to look after New York Dolls or something for a while, and said he was putting a band together. And after half an hour telling me this stuff, he said, "And do you want to join?" But he hadn't asked me what I did. He didn't even ask if I was a musician. They stopped me because I'd kind of James Dean quiff,
right,
and didn't look like everybody else in Glasgow at the time. So I turned down the Pistols, and why they were there was funny enough. And I told Steve Jones, the guitarist of the Pistols, this a couple of years ago on his radio show. Why they were in Glasgow was that they'd driven from London and stopped at every major city to try and sell some slightly hot equipment from their boot. And they'd made it to Glasgow and they still had some bits. So I turned down the Pistols, but I bought an amplifier.
That sound was what I believe is called fanboying. I love that guy. I love his music. And it lived up to expectations. You can catch that full interview wherever on the Global Player, on the Full Disclosure Archive. It's got an incredible list now. Someone printed out the list of everyone we've done the other day. It's extraordinary. It's turning into who's who. And this week's guest is an absolute hoot as well. I won't tell you who it is yet, but I will before I go home. Back to the benefit cap, the wisdom or otherwise of it, and the potential rebellion on Labour benches, led by the former Chancellor John McDonnell, hoping to leverage Keir Starmer into getting rid of it and finding the £3 to £3.5 billion it would apparently cost. Paul's in Blackpool. Paul, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
Just we're talking about the means testing. I have one child, and I'm unable to claim any benefits for that one child due to the fact that you lose 10% for every £1,000 you earn over a certain amount of money.
Right.
I think the means testing that should be per household rather than just the highest earner, because I go slightly over the 100%. But my wife's nowhere close. But there's people who work for me in the same industry that I work in who've both got jobs that are just shy of the losing 10%. Them in a greater amount of money per year than what myself and my wife. And it was means tested by.
So you're the person I was talking about, aren't you? You're the one for whom the threshold feels very, very unfair.
It does, because I could earn £60,000, my wife could earn £10,000, and I could be and claim nothing, and another couple could be earning £49,990.
So they only look at one income. It's not joint household income.
No, it's just the highest earner.
Well, that's what I was trying to talk about when I had my Joe Biden moment. So the original threshold is 50 grand, and that's where the percentages kick in up to 60 grand. So you could both be earning you could both be earning £49,000 a year and get the full amount for both children. Yeah. And yet, if a bloke over the road is earning £51,000 or £61,000 like you get absolutely nothing. So you could have neighbours with a joint income of almost double what your household income is, and they would get the benefit, and you wouldn't.
And these people, like I say, who work in the same department as me, who earning £30,000 more than what myself and my partner earn.
Yeah.
They claim there's full 100% of for one or two children. I have one, and I don't struggle. I don't need.
No, you're not begrudging it, but you're just pointing out the anomaly.
If it was looked at as being family, both earners, might be able to. Well, you should be in a position then where you can say, right, no, you don't. You either don't. If they're going to offer the third child, give it to the people who need this money.
Yeah, I mean that is probably, if we had a referendum, God forbid, that would probably be well, would it though? Because I was going to say be the most popular option is you bring in means testing and then extend an extra payment to the poorest families, but they would be the most susceptible to the right-wing rhetoric of don't have children if you can't afford them, which is why I like the idea of it applying to everybody equally, even if it does cost a lot. It's what we used to do. We managed. We didn't go bust.
Yeah. But I just think that, I mean, we had a child because we wanted to have a child. We didn't look I didn't look financially at it. If I thought I couldn't afford to have a child, I probably wouldn't have had one.
But that means different. That means yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's a.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Oddly, I think the more
some people's real frustrations with this, with people who are from big families want big families, and there's other people who want kids at all. Now, there'd be a lot of people in my position, and a lot of people who are better off who will be saying, if you can't afford them, don't have them. But
yes,
it's a very
but also it creates, as what we're talking about it as a societal issue rather than an economic one, and you know, the person with 4 children, those children are worth the same as the family with the child of a one-child family like yours. In terms of their potential contribution to society, they should probably be treated the same. I haven't seen this quote before from an American pastor, but I think I've come close to saying something very similar myself in the past. Paul, thank you, mate. You're precisely the person I needed to talk to just to clarify anomaly I was trying to describe when I had my Joe Biden moment. Probably shouldn't turn that into a figure of speech, should we, Joe Biden moment? It's not helpful to anybody. But listen to this. I hate that when the discussion turns to helping people, there's always someone who takes the most ungenerous, contemptible stand towards others. If by helping legitimately needy people, I accidentally help some lazy people, so what? How is that worse than helping no one? That's the line you need, that final line there. How is this worse than helping nobody? Well, I know someone, there's 5 kids, they've got a car on bricks in the front garden, he hasn't worked since 1977, why should they get, that's fine, all right? In an ideal world, we probably wouldn't be helping them. But how is what is happening today worse than helping nobody? Guys in Windsor. Guy, what would you like to say?
I think we do need to we need to pay child benefit to all children. I started off thinking, you know, I've got no skin in this game, but because I don't have kids, I intrinsically live as a single man. My girlfriend's in a care home, so you know, and she's relying on that. And when she desperately needed it, you know, it was there for her.
Yes, that's safety net territory, isn't it?
As a safety net, but I do have skin in this game. Lots of people, you know, later in the show, so lots of people have mentioned things I wanted to say, but who's going to look after us when we get older? Because these people that write these papers, these articles in the papers, they don't want immigration, James.
No, definitely
they don't want. They don't want kids. Poor. They don't want poor people having more than 2 children. They don't want to pay nurses enough so that they don't go to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, you know, wherever. And we do need people to pay for me in my dotage. We all have a stake in this.
I think if you need every family to be having just over 2 children as a sort of average. I wonder whether that's where the 2.4 children figure of speech comes from.
It's very difficult to have 0.4 of a child.
It certainly is, and we certainly won't be doing any jokes at this point. But that keeps a society ticking over, as it were. And so it's odd that we've put a limit below the optimum level that keeps society ticking over, that keeps society stable.
Yeah, the last Labour government sort of did something. I can't remember what it was, but it was they got an investment that they could then spend when they got to a certain age, 18 or whatever.
That's right, yeah, they did, didn't they?
And I think we need to look at it that way. These children, they don't get to choose their parents. I certainly didn't. You know, you get born, and your duty, if you like, is to be the best person you could be.
Yeah.
And you know that benefit may be the difference between a child going to a zoo with the school, and that child may become a great zoologist, then decide, well, actually, it's not animals that I want to do, it's humans, and come up with a cure for cancer. If well, it's the whole of society. It is. It's a weird one. I don't know how deep we dug into it at the time. I genuinely can't remember. It may have been during that unfortunate period of the programme where we could only talk about Brexit for reasons that I'm still not entirely clear about. But I didn't see it as nuanced or as deep as I do now, and what it says about a society rather than simply an economy. But I thought that the very first caller actually was very helpful with the reminder that in some ways it was a sort of knee-jerk reaction to media coverage of largely but not entirely mythical scenarios where people appeared to be swinging the lead on an extraordinary scale. Do you know what? I wonder what the timing of that policy was with relation to that sort of poverty porn that was all over the telly not long ago.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. I am not medically qualified. I hope that doesn't come as a major shock to anybody who's followed my advice or heeded my words over the last few years. I certainly don't have the diagnostic framework necessary to conclude whether or not you are a narcissist or whether or not anybody else is a narcissist. But I do know what I think narcissism is. And today, three stories have appeared, two of which come from the same seed, two of which are born of the same research, published in the Psychological Bulletin this week, and looking at narcissism and age. But the Daily Mail today carries an interview or an article by a woman who wrote a book called How to Go No Contact with Your Narcissistic Mother. And it poses the question in big headline type, is your mother a narcissist? Here are the 10 signs to look for. And then the broader research, which the BBC has broken down today, claims or argues, and the Times has this on its front page, that narcissistic people do actually get more empathetic, generous and agreeable with age, which I think is good news for everybody. There are 3 types of narcissist, apparently, based on behaviour traits. I'm going to tell you what they are, and I'm going to suggest a politician for each one of these, but not until we get to the end. I'll say 3 politicians who, in my opinion, fit these descriptions of what a narcissist is, and then you decide which one is which. All right? So the 3 politicians are Suella Braverman, Nigel Farage, and Boris Johnson. Suella Braverman, Nigel Farage, and Boris Johnson. I, in my opinion, think that what I know of them fits the descriptions that the researchers were looking for in the context of 3 types of narcissist. The first is called an agentic narcissist. These narcissists feel grand or superior to others and crave admiration. Oh, I don't know, actually. I think I may have chosen the wrong examples. Do you think I've chosen the wrong examples? Well, we'll find out. So an agentic narcissist feels grand or superior to others and craves admiration. Antagonistic narcissists see others as rivals and are exploitative and lack empathy. That's easy, right? Everyone knows who that one is. Everyone knows who I think that one is. An antagonistic narcissist sees others as rivals and they're exploitative and they lack empathy. And finally, the neurotic narcissist. The neurotic narcissist who is shame-prone, insecure, and overly sensitive to criticism. Shame-prone, insecure, and overly sensitive to criticism. So I've got Johnson, Braverman, and Farage written down in front of me, and I as I read them out, I wondered whether I'd actually got that right. As I've finished reading them out, I think I have. But you tell me which way you think it is. Which one of those breaks down most effectively for you? Because the question I want to ask is quite a serious one, particularly when we look at the story of mothers having a narcissistic mother. I'll run you through the 10 questions that you should ask yourself, because they'll apply to other relationships as well. The question I'm going to ask at 7 minutes after 12 is, what's it like to have a narcissist in your life? 0345 6060 973. And how do you define it in a way that is born of your experiences with loved ones or colleagues or friends? So this is the one that they do for mums. Does she celebrate your successes? So immediately I can tell you with 100% certainty that my mum is whatever the opposite of a narcissist is. If my mum celebrated my successes any more enthusiastically, we'd have to buy a bigger boat. That pride in the achievements of your children, most of us consider to be one of the most fundamental hallmarks of parenthood. But we were chatting about this in the office earlier, and of course, it isn't. Some people don't have that simple joy of seeing their parents take enormous pride in their achievements. So does your mum celebrate your successes? Is she supportive in tough times? Because if she's a narcissist, she's got so little empathy that she doesn't have a clue what you need. One woman told the author of this book that she sobbed down the phone to her mother after she had a miscarriage, and instead of providing a sympathetic ear, her mother said, "You've got to stop crying. It's tough for me. I've lost my grandchild and you're making me even sadder." Any bells tinkling yet? In the context of your personal relationships? Do you feel confused after being with your mum? Does your mum have favourites? Does she respect your personal space? Here's a good one. Did she behave? How did she behave at your wedding? If there's one thing narcissists can't resist, it's the chance to upstage their daughters. Well, now I can categorically state with 200% certainty that neither my mother nor my mother-in-law are narcissists, which is not exactly a surprise, but I suppose a form of relief. Does she blame you if things go wrong? That's a tough one, actually, because I think I've got a tiny little bit of that, or I certainly did before therapy. Part of my survival personality, born in boarding school, would be to sort of try and kid myself that things weren't bad, and if they were bad, it wasn't my fault. So I think, sometimes if you stub your toe, I'm probably being a little bit hard on myself here in the context of narcissism, because the author writes, narcissists expect to be recognised as brilliant, even if they don't have the achievements to prove it. Gosh. So if I stub my toe, I look around for someone to blame for the thing on the floor that I've just stubbed my toe on. I don't think that's quite what the author is talking about. Does she build you up, then tear you down? Does she hijack your children? And finally, is she a fan of the faux-pology? That's a portmanteau word, and indeed a neologism, the faux-pology, which is what they say may sound like an apology, but they're not actually taking any responsibility for her behaviour. How many times have I said to you, there's no but in sorry? So here's an example. I'm sorry you're upset. Or I'm sorry you think I wasn't a good mother. Or I'm sorry you can't take a joke. That's a great one. That's very passive-aggressive. I'm sorry you can't take a joke. I'm sorry you're upset. No, you should say sorry for upsetting me. No, I'm sorry you're upset. So I don't know whether we could get a whole phoning out of just mums on this one. Is your mum, what's it like to have a narcissistic mother? 0345 6060 973. Although Becky is already quite rightly picking up on the fact that narcissism is proven to be more likely to develop in men. So not entirely appropriate that the focus should be on mothers. Let me scratch that suggestion that we confine it exclusively to mothers immediately. Because clearly the worst kind of narcissist is the one you're going out with or the one you're married to. And when we were talking about this in the office, so it's either a friend, a lover, or a parent, really, isn't it? Some of us will probably have thoughts of narcissistic colleagues in our minds. Some of us may have worked with people who seemed absolutely incapable of acknowledging the existence of anybody else's feelings. Have you ever had that? Have you ever had a sort of conversation with somebody and you can just watch them almost physically glaze over as they wait for the opportunity to start talking about themselves again? It's strange, isn't it, that people could be so blithely unaware of that. If you love stories, I wonder whether you can be a narcissist. You love other people's stories. Every story is somebody else's story. If you're fascinated by why things work and how you feel, how we feel about things, fascinated about why people do the things that they do, arguably you can't be a narcissist. So the worst type of people, really, to go into politics would be narcissists. And I think with absolutely no diagnostic skills whatsoever, I do think that the recent political landscape has been so awful because there have been so many narcissists. I really do. 12 minutes after 12 is the time. So what is it like to have a narcissist in your life? That's what I want to know. And the examples. So those of us who are going, well, surely these are just the ups and downs of a normal relationship, the good days and the bad days. What are the things that have happened to you that leave you persuaded, having just heard me run through some of these details, or long before this conversation started, you were sure that you had a narcissist in your life? Your ex was a narcissist. Your current is a narcissist. Your dad, your mum, your brother. What is it like to have a narcissist in your life? And what have they done, or what do they do that makes you reach for that word? Yeah? To reach for the word narcissist. What was the behaviour, either in terms of patterns or in terms of individual instances? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. David said, I learned as a child to never apologise because that's how my parents and sister behaved. It caused problems for me in school, and it wasn't until my early adulthood I realised what an awful trait it was, and it took a lot of work to learn how to take responsibility and empathise with others, which is not the kind of contribution I was expecting, but it was the one that caught my eye first because it does two things. It speaks to the research that shows people get more empathetic, generous and agreeable with age, and it also speaks to the possibility of being able to both recognise narcissistic traits in yourself and fix them. So we'll introduce that into the conversation as well. So, two questions now. What is it like to have a narcissist in your life? Or what is it like to have narcissism in your life? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
16 minutes after 12 is the time. The notion of narcissism, it's a little bit cheeky, isn't it, to apply an official diagnosis to somebody when we have no qualifications to do so. But that's why I'm asking, what makes you reach for that word? What are the behaviours or the patterns of people in your life that leads you to suspect, if not conclude, that narcissism is the only word that fits? Nina is in Islington. Nina, what would you like to say?
Hi. I have a very narcissistic dad. My mum, unfortunately, isn't around anymore, but I think she had some traits of narcissism that you just read out. But for my dad, it's unbelievable, the selfishness. So, for example, he still doesn't know what any of his children exactly do. I'm a writer and editor. It's not that hard to know what it is it?
You're not Chandler Bing, then. You don't have a job like Chandler Bing, so nobody knows what he does.
Exactly. And one of my brothers is a computer programmer. Again, it's not that hard. So, but still, my dad never celebrates our successes, and he's also a massive hypochondriac. But the reason why I've really called in today is there are two things that listeners might want to look in who also have narcissistic parents. Number one is that if your parents are narcissistic, it very likely creates the reverse reaction in you, which is sometimes diagnosed as depression. So, for example, if your parents never celebrate your successes, that might mean that you yourself think you're a permanent failure. So you go into a completely sort of, if you will, reverse narcissism, where everything you do is awful.
Gosh.
And the other thing that I've discussed with a psychologist, because, obviously, when you have parents like this, you don't get away unscathed.
No, for sure.
But the other thing is there is something called adult-child syndrome. So if your parents are always useless because they're always looking after themselves, they never celebrate your successes, they're never supportive, you kind of, as a child, basically have to take over the role of an adult sometimes. Now, that isn't healthy. So this is something, again, that I think children of narcissistic parents might want to read up on. I'm not sure if there's actually therapy for it, but sometimes it just helps to understand why you are acting the way you do.
Because you've had an unnatural or an inauthentic emotional development. Your emotional development has been defined by things that shouldn't have happened to you. So, whether it's abuse of a more obvious and explicit kind, or whether it is this reversal of roles. So the person who should be nurturing you and bigging you up and preparing you for the outside world has actually done the opposite. So you've then had to do work on yourself, which makes you inauthentic. It makes you your inauthentic self. That's a big thing in therapy, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a big thing. And I think, I mean, as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm German, but I've been in the UK for, more than 25 years. And I know from experience that GPs intuitively go, first of all, for depression as an analysis for you, or as a diagnosis, rather.
Yes.
But there might be other things as well that I think might be useful for kids of narcissistic parents to look into.
This is so interesting. Final question. If you're with your dad, does he just talk about himself endlessly, or does he and not ask about anything you've done, or is that too simplistic?
What else is there to talk about?
He can't find anything else interesting except his own his own wonderfulness.
Ridiculous.
I've just remembered it. Thank you, Nina. That's a perfect start. I've just remembered someone I know telling me that they were meeting their dad for lunch, and almost laughing about the fact that he would talk from the beginning to the end about himself and not ask any questions about what she'd been up to. And that's someone famous. That's all I'm saying. Rob's in Durham. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. To be honest, I've just switched over to LBC just on my lunch break, and hearing you kind of start about the narcissistic parents and just kind of listing everything. It's just, I've just sat and laughed because my mum ticks every single box.
Oh, mate.
It's crazy. And it's just blown me away, to be honest.
But did you know, is that a word you would have used before?
Well, I think my wife's kind of hinted that she's a bit selfish at times and stuff like that. But it's
your poor wife must have to really walk on eggshells on this one.
It's one of those things. I'm just like, it's like a light bulb moment. It's
really
absolute. Yeah. It's crazy. Every single thing you mentioned.
Good Lord. What happened at the wedding? That's one of them. That's the most. I mean, you mentioned you had a wife. That's the only reason why I asked.
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of sticks out to me was I'd gone out to see my. Well, it was kind of the time for the speeches.
Yeah.
My best man was outside, so I went and grabbed him and said, "Come in, we're sitting down for meals and we're gonna have speeches and stuff." And it was okay. And as I was walking back in, the kind of master of ceremonies came to me, and my mum beeline straight in front, stood in front of them, in front of everybody, and just went, "Have you seen what's just happened?" And I just looked past her, and I think the waiter had dropped the drink next to my dad, and someone splashed on his leg or something. A complete accident.
Yeah.
But it was just a massive thing of like, what are you going to do about this? I'm like, it's not my...
It's really not my priority at the moment.
Yeah,
Mum.
Exactly. And that was one of the things, but it was like when she arrived, it was where can she go and get ready at the venue? Why is the room's not very nice? The room's dark. I could list a million things, honestly.
So I'm trying to put it into the categorization. So it's impossible for her to conceive that this is not about her.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It must have been tricky over the years, but I suppose you kind of learn to accommodate it, don't you? You learn to.
It's one of those things that I sort of call. I was telling you, researcher. I'll call her kind of every other day and just kind of see how she is. And it is literally just a time for me to just kind of shut up and just listen to. Because she's a hypochondriac.
That's a recurring theme. That's a recurring theme.
And she'll just list things.
What are you going to say when you speak to your wife later today?
I'm going to show her the recording on
Take it easy. Cheers, Rob. Thank you. This is Ashley, female Ashley. That wedding one really takes me back, James. Nearly 5 years ago exactly, I married the love of my life. I was 30 weeks pregnant with my second child. It was a high-risk pregnancy. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mum decided she was unhappy with the seating plan, and if I didn't change it, she wouldn't be attending. I physically couldn't change it, so she decided she wouldn't be attending my wedding. She then changed her mind because I didn't start begging. She spent the whole day alternating between sulking in the corner and telling everyone how much she had spent. I realised at my wedding that there had never been a single event in my life that she had not upstaged. Even the birth of my son and his neonatal intensive care stay was upstaged by her experience. We're very low contact now so that she doesn't pass on the emotional damage to my children. I parent by doing the opposite of what my parents did. Having a narcissist parent is absolutely exhausting. And some nice words about Robert Buckland, the Tory politician who we were a little unnice about earlier in the show. He deserved that, and he deserves this as well from Scott, who's in Rothwell. He said, the best explanation for narcissism in politics came from Robert Buckland last week after losing his seat. He spoke about the plague of people in politics who want to be someone rather than do something, seeking position and profile rather than actually being there to do the job. Andrew's in Leicester. Andrew, what made you pick up the phone?
It just you touched on some points there, and I think I can echo many of the sentiments that other callers have rang in with. Yeah. I actually had to work with my father for since '97 up until 2 or 3 years ago, where he effectively sacked me as the managing director, would go around calling himself the chairman. It was a very complicated story, but I've been told by many people I should probably write a book about some of the stories. Absolutely wild. I've got a couple of colleagues who are listening, are probably chuckling to themselves at some of the events that happened. But effectively, I didn't really attribute the word narcissism to him until the end. And a lot of it's about control, and that control slips through their hands, and they get vicious. Not physically, but the vitriol, the anger is incredible, and you're made to believe that it's all your fault. You are devil incarnate, and you are the problem in all these situations. And I just want to reach out to everyone and say, you are not the problem. These people are the problem, and quite frankly, I went through a lot of soul searching. I've been to a therapist about this to go through to see why I'm the normal one in the relationship. I'm not the one with a problem.
But it took work for you to realise that.
It took a lot of work for me to realise that, and I was always being told, you need to go and see an anger therapist, and I'm not an angry person, but
your dad kept telling you that you were.
Because he was the only one that could push my buttons. And I think that, for me, the only way out of it was actually to say, I've had enough of this, and draw and effectively walk away from the business.
Cut the cord.
Fortunately, I had plenty of people around me who I love dearly, who turned around to me and said, Andrew, we need you to do something. And I had to buy the company off him for a large amount of money. In fact, through his games of 10 times we reviewed the deal that we did, he ended up costing himself about £60,000 through his games, but he's telling everyone that he won the battle.
Getting the better of you. So he was someone who needed to feel superior to others.
And he would always exact punishment. Or everyone had to...
What about when you were little? How would it manifest itself when you were little? I mean... Were you ever the centre of attention when you were a little boy in his world?
No, absolutely not. It's very much about my father, and I think during my childhood he was working a lot. My mother raised me, and my mother is an absolute wonderful human being, and I'm fortunate I get most of my empathy from her. And even now I'm like, how on earth did you end up with this man?
What does she say?
She's just a good person. She said, I just did what I had to do, and she doesn't speak bad of him. And it wasn't until
they're not together anymore. Are they still together?
Oh God, no.
I thought that was a bit of a given.
But this is the time. So I'll tell you a very quick story.
Yeah, go on.
When they split up, my father had a good job, well paying. My mother was a bank nurse, raised 2 children on her own, and through control, and it's always about control, he limited the maintenance that he had to pay to my mother.
Right.
She went to court to ask for another £20 a month, and this is in the 90s, mid-90s. He fought her against that, and he basically said to the judge, unless I get a receipt for every single penny of that £20, I'm not going to give it to her.
Right.
At the end of the judgment...
Showing what she'd spent it on.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the end of it, my father's barrister walked up to my mother and her barrister and said, I don't know what's wrong with that man. I've got loads of stories like that.
Well, I could tell, but that's a zinger. It's so good to hear your voice and the fact that you've ended up in such a better place, and so nice of you. And evidence of the empathy that you described to preface almost everything you said with the sort of words of encouragement to other people who could make the changes or go on the journey that you have been on. It is the parents more than the partners it's partly the way that I set the conversation up, but when we were having the conversation in the office earlier, it was, what is it like to go out with a narcissist or have a narcissist as a best friend? But goodness me, I can tell you this is really a Pandora's box. I'm not going to be able to speak to a fraction of the number of people ringing in or trying to get in touch. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will catch up with Natasha Clark after this because she has just got back from Washington, D.C. With her, she accompanied Keir Starmer on his visit to the White House. But first, Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. There's an example in the back of my mind somewhere that I can't quite. It was to do with a death, and someone arrived. I've had quite a few deaths in my life lately, so I can't remember precisely what it was. But somebody arrived with the widow, and couldn't stop talking about their own pain, how sad they were, and I was with the widow, and I mean, happily, we just sort of caught each other's eye. Going back a few years, I remember who it was, and it was. I didn't know this person very well, but it was almost incomprehensible. Well, it was incomprehensible until you understand what narcissism is. So it was at the wake, and someone is literally talking about how much they miss him, and how sad they are, and how heartbroken, but not in the normal way, but in a way that didn't acknowledge the widow's feelings at all. Oh, you must be really sad. I'm so sorry for you. It's a bit like going up to someone at a funeral, going up to the widow or the widow at a funeral and saying, oh, I'm so sorry for me. That's what it is. There it is. That's narcissism. Oh, God, I'm good. That's narcissism as well. That, oh, God, I'm good bit. So you go up to the widow or the widower at the funeral, and instead of saying, I'm so sorry for you, which is what we would do, right? That would be the normal, natural, I'm so sorry for you. You go up to the widow at a funeral and you say, I'm so sorry for me. I'm so sorry for me. And that's why the weddings would be relevant as well, because you would struggle, wouldn't you, to even understand what the, what's the word I'm looking for? What the motivation is for that kind of behaviour. 12:35 is the time. A bit of a change. Natasha Clark has just landed. She's still on the tarmac, back from Washington, D.C., whither she accompanied Sir Keir Starmer. And I suppose I have to begin by asking you whether it is fair that the huge bulk of the coverage of yesterday's events focuses upon Joe Biden's latest gaffe, Natasha.
Good afternoon, James. I think it is fair. I don't think I've ever really seen anything like it covering a NATO summit or indeed on any of these international summits. That was some press conference that he gave. You know, they are all meant to give these sort of slightly run-of-the-mill end of the conference, nice little summing up speech saying, thanks so much for coming. We've done loads of good stuff on defence, loads of good stuff for Ukraine. That was obviously the theme of what President Biden should have been focused on. And obviously everybody should have been focused on at this summit. But for him to start in the final but one press conference that the US was leading on, it was meant to be the final Ukraine session, Joe Biden introducing President Zelensky on stage, and then to turn to him and saying, and now I'm turning to President Putin. It was just mind-blowing to watch. And it was such a moment that we weren't in the room that happened in, but in a room next door waiting for Keir Starmer to come and do his closing remarks. And like it went round the room like a ripple. People just stopping, looking at their phones. We all gathered round and huddled round to look at the exact moment and the footage and the video and Zelensky's reaction. Like once it clocked, once the penny sort of hit for him, he obviously, I think, was upset from the look on his face. He tried to sort of have a little smile and sort of shrug it off and say, I'm better than him. Yeah. And Biden sort of said, yeah, of course you are. But you know what? I don't think there's a greater insult for someone like President Zelensky than to be compared to Vladimir
or
Putin.
a greater pitfall in the current context for Joe Biden to have fallen into. Should we have a listen to it? I think we probably should.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot
well played, Volodymyr. So, in conclusion, Natasha, these things now, if they were happening in isolation, could be glossed over or excused, but it assumes epic proportions because they are happening in the context of that press conference and other gaffes as well.
Exactly, and to be honest with you, James, this discussion around Joe Biden's future was already overshadowing this conference before any of these gaffes were made. Aides within Biden's team, according to US reports, openly for the first time having discussions about what happens if Biden has to step down, what are the conditions that might look like, how they might persuade him and his team that now the time is up. So that was already happening before even these gaffes. Joe Biden really needed to just to get through this summit unscathed. He had one job, which was just to not mess anything up, not make any boo-boos. And then within the next few minutes after that Zelensky gaffe, he then went on to give his own press conference, to conclude the summit. And he then made yet another gaffe when he confused Donald Trump with his own Vice President Kamala Harris. He said Vice President Donald Trump. And everybody in that room, again, looking around each other, completely baffled, going, is this guy okay? And, we saw him up close in the Oval Office, James, when Keir Starmer went in to do that BiLAP talk with him.
That's exciting.
And it was so exciting, but equally it just made me feel quite sorry for him. He's a really very old man, and we don't know if there is anything wrong with him. He revealed in the press conference that he has done 3 exams, cognitive and neurological exams, on the advice of his physicians. He didn't sort of say what those revealed. He said he'll do many more tests if that is the case, if people ask him to do so. But it just felt very much like a man that obviously has the grip of the detail. He's all over things like Ukraine. He's very read across his briefs. But he admitted that he's not pacing himself well enough. He's a man that sometimes gets up at 7 o'clock in the morning and goes and works through right until midnight. And for an 81-year-old man, regardless of whether or not he's ill, it's very clear to me that seeing him up close, he just can't cope with the pace of life, of being a president anymore.
Everything is slowing down. Natasha, thank you. You must be pretty shattered yourself, albeit that you're very young. So I hope you get some proper rest after that trip. And we'll catch up next week on what the Oval Office is actually like. Oh, I'm well gel, as I believe the kids say. Natasha Clark there, LBC's political editor, just back from Washington, D.C., where she was in the press pack when Joe Biden accidentally called Volodymyr Zelensky President Putin, and later got Kamala Harris, his own vice president, mixed up with Donald Trump. It's not ideal, is it? 20-1 is the time. Try this. I'm not going to say your name because it's quite distinctive and it's quite an intimate message, this, but it really moved me. I'd like you to know that. I just had to pull over, James, and write some thoughts down on this subject. My partner has a somewhat narcissistic father, and it has affected her to the point where when I said I was proud of her for something she'd achieved, she broke down and cried. Since then, I've made a real point of ensuring that she knows how much I love her and how proud I am of her. I had my own father issues growing up. A trigger warning here for anybody who suffered particularly unpleasant experiences in childhood. My correspondent writes, I was sexually abused when I was young, and because of that trauma, I've effectively blocked so much of my childhood off to the point that I barely remember anything from those years. So there is a part of me that would have much rather have had her father than my own, and I sometimes struggle to empathise as much as I try. Sounds to me like you are succeeding in empathising a lot more than you realise. And this message ends, now that we've got a daughter, I feel that there is double the pressure on me to be a good father because I'm breaking the cycle from both grandfathers. And again, it sounds to me like you are doing a pretty good job. I've lost the one where there was one where somebody said they didn't realise that they were. Here it is. I didn't realise I was in a relationship with a narcissistic person until Donald Trump turned up. I shall read you the rest of that text shortly, but let's get back to the phones. Harry is in Leeds. Harry, what would you like to say?
Unfortunately, I got hit with both barrels of the gun. I've got both types of narcissism in my parents. No. My dad is a grandiose narcissist, and my mother's a vulnerable. And it's one of those really tricky situations. And I ended up having to go no contact with them.
How old are you?
I'm 23.
Oh, mate, that's tough.
Yeah. No, I mean...
well, it's tough, except that you know it's better that way than it would be the other way around. But from the outside, it's tough. It sounds tough. It sounds awful.
Yeah, I do. A lot of my friends are, not... they're they're quite regretful for me that I have to do this. But yeah, it's quite an intense experience to like recognize, because up until maybe 3 years ago, just before I met my wife, I didn't even think either of my parents were narcissists. I thought they were pretty standard people. I didn't really know that other parents behaved differently. I thought it was quite a normal thing for people to behave that way.
Once you made that realization, what sort of behaviors did you suddenly see in a different light? What sort of things did you experience growing up?
Well, it's one of those things like the violent outbursts when things aren't going in that controlled manner according to my father, and then the kind of emotional, like the use of the guilt from my mother when I was not necessarily being rebellious, but sort of growing out and becoming more of my own person, and not wanting to have my parents around me so much. So they started to lose control of me, and it kind of affected them in similar ways in the reality of it, and it actually has caused for them to divorce as well. So they're in the process of that, because when I met my wife, I started to become a bit firmer in the way that I kind of communicated to them, and Do you know, in a way, you're lucky. Yeah.
Because you've spotted it quite early in your own journey and dealt with it. And it's worth mentioning that, you know, a lot of, as I understand it, a lot of what we call narcissism is itself a response to experience. It can be a response particularly to childhood experiences, which is why good therapy can help, not just with the consequences of having narcissistic parents, but it could probably help the narcissistic parent improve. The problem with the grandiosity angle is that they wouldn't really want to or think that there was anything wrong with them in the first place, would they?
Yeah, I mean, he's buggered off over to Sierra Leone, and he's done all of his business. I ended up, unfortunately, so I'm a father to a young'un, and I've got a second on the way, and
wow.
It's one of those like long-term impacts on your mental health, because it's really twisted my self-esteem regarding fatherhood.
Well, you've got a cycle to break, haven't you? You heard that last message that I read out just before you came on. You've got some cycles to break, and you've got proper love in your life now. It sounds with your wife. So, good luck, mate. But no one's underestimating the scale of the challenges ahead, even without the background that you've described. And there it is. There's so much here that is. Some of it can be quite funny, and then someone like Harry can remind you just how deep and horrible it can be. Gerard, that's a nice message. I'll read it. This is a brilliant programme, James. It's so reassuring to know that one is not alone. And that is why we do subjects like this. Jamie writes, my dad's a narcissist. My wife and I chose to get married in Spain. And my dad said he won't come unless we get married in the UK. He said he doesn't like Spain and won't be coming, but he goes on numerous holidays abroad every year, and it was simply not a valid excuse. He didn't even wish me congratulations, which really hurt me. It upsets me that my father can't even bring himself to do something for someone else, but I've accepted that he will never change, and I would never want to treat my future children the way he treats me. There are a few things more important in life than breaking negative or toxic cycles. Carl puts it best. He writes, breaking cycles is awesome and amazing and powerful. Damn right, Carl.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. Here's an example of how to politely change the way I present the programme. This is from Robert. James, please remember that the Vice President pronounces her name Kamala, like Pamela or Camelot. This is important to her, and it shows respect for her historic achievement, which I know you appreciate. Have a lovely weekend. And there is something that I will change forevermore. A lot of people being profoundly moved by this conversation. Here is Sarah. I've cried throughout this section as it has really hurt me to my core, James. My mum is a narcissist, and it's caused me so many psychological issues. I was married to a narcissist, and it's taken me about 5 years to get a divorce. He still uses the kids against me and tries to make my life hell at every opportunity. I worry every day that I've inherited narcissistic traits because I don't want my children to suffer like I did. I think, and again, with absolutely zero qualification, except I hope some empathy, Sarah, or I'd say the fact that you're worrying about it is almost certainly proof that you've got nothing to worry about. Thank you for bringing this subject to light. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be able to speak to everybody who's rung in about it, and it clearly means an awful lot to a lot of people. And I know that Sheila is returning to this territory at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, from 3 o'clock this afternoon. So, I mean, you should be sticking with LBC anyway to enjoy some of the Fogarty. But if this particular topic is one that's very close to your heart, or this conversation is reaching places that perhaps other conversations don't reach, then Sheila will be your guide back into it at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Before that, Chrissy is in West Sussex. Chrissy, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, thank you, James. Yeah,
Hello.
first time caller here.
Very welcome.
Thank you. I mean, I just listened to all your previous callers and I'm just ticking off the boxes here.
Oh, Lord.
You read out 10 points of recognising a narcissistic mother,
Yes.
and I got to 8. But one resonated with me so much. It was about the wedding. My mum didn't come to my first wedding. My second wedding, many years later, was at a venue.
Yeah.
My husband was downstairs greeting the guests, saw my mother turning up, so made a beeline to welcome her, and that, knowing the sort of relationship we had. And her first comments to her were, "You know, it's not too late to change your mind."
And he told you this straight away?
He told me after the wedding, yeah.
Good
He said,
grief.
"I don't know if you want to know this." And I thought,
Why do you think she did that?
Because she's a horrible woman.
That's the easy answer. I was hoping for something a bit more psychologically sophisticated. Just because she couldn't take pleasure in your pleasure. She couldn't do a normal maternal pride or joy, or not being the centre of attention, or whatever it was.
No, my mum's never taken any pride in anything I've done. In fact, I think her biggest achievement in her life was throwing me out of the house when I was 16 years old.
Well, you poor thing. And so she sounds like an antagonistic narcissist who see others as rivals and are exploitative and lack empathy.
Well, she told me that she didn't want me and I should have been a boy. So, I mean,
Oh, my darling, that's just not fair. You sound as if you've managed to retain a degree of cheerfulness.
I think the funniest thing is whenever I've had friends and I've always got on well with their parents, especially usually their mums,
how interesting.
my old friend and that will always say, "Oh, I don't understand how you can put up with it," and that. And I said, "Well, I know no different. She's been like this all my life. I know no different." So that's the way it is, you know.
And clearly you have broken the cycle in your own life.
Gosh, yeah. I was determined not to be the mother my mother was. But can I also, you asked about 3 politicians.
Yes, I did.
And my answers would be Farage, Boris and Suella.
What, in that order?
Yeah.
God.
Have I got it right?
You know, you got all 3 wrong.
Oh!
I thought quite a few people got it right. That's why I was glad you brought it up, because I'd forgotten to do I thought that the agentic narcissist who feels grand or superior to others and craves admiration was Johnson.
Right.
The one like your mum was Braverman.
Right, yeah.
And the one who is shame-prone, insecure and overly sensitive to criticism was Farage.
Farage, shame-prone? I don't think so.
Of course he is. His entire life is about shame and not being made to feel like he did as a child.
Oh, right, yeah.
I almost feel sorry for him when you put it like that. But maybe these are Venn diagrams, Chrissy, aren't they? And they're all crossing over into each other. Just for the avoidance of doubt, neither of us have any qualifications whatsoever in this field. But, you know, nor does Farage in politics. It's 12:53 and Debbie's in Stoke-on-Trent. Debbie, thank you, Chrissy. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Again, James, just listening to you reading that list out earlier, not the one about the politicians, but the 10 points, and you think that is absolutely my mum, apart from, like some of the other callers, she didn't come to my wedding.
Why not?
Because my stepmum, who'd been my stepmum for 16 years, was going to be at the wedding, which wasn't a surprise, given that my stepmum was part paying for it.
Of course.
And basically, my mum's
So it was a protest. I'm not coming.
Yeah, I'm not coming. So I went, right, okay, to the point where on the day I was getting married, I gave instructions to everybody that if she was outside the church or wanted to come in the church to watch, I wasn't getting married. I felt so strongly about the whole thing. My brother also, and this is, I was just talking to your lovely researcher, my brother also ticks all of those boxes, apart from he did come to my wedding.
Right.
But I think where it all started, and you realise, is that my mum and dad split up when I was 11. My mum left my dad for his best friend.
Oh, Lord.
Yet she never called us. I was 11, my brother was 8. She never phoned us, ever. She expected us to phone her because she was a hard-done-to party because she no longer lived with us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Even though, well, no, it's fine, because actually I was a whole load happier. And I think this seems to be a recurring theme. I remember going into school a few days later and the teacher saying, you know, a beautiful teacher, and she said, so sorry, we're all very empathetic. And I was like, no, I'm really happy. And I actually wrote in my diary, great news, you know, Mum left Dad today. It's really good. What I was more annoyed about was she actually took the radio with her, so I couldn't listen to,
that's
to the radio when I got from
That's
school.
outrageous. That's abusive behaviour.
And I think the sad thing is that as you then get older,
yes,
you feel like you're the one that's got something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I realised it when I started saying, probably in my late teens, early 20s, and genuinely meaning, if there was a building on fire, it would be my friends I get out first, not most of my family. My grandparents take out of that equation, but
of course,
certainly not my family, because I don't feel close to them. They make you feel like a failure because you can go out for a family meal and realise that nobody has asked you a question.
They're not remotely interested in you. Remotely interested in you. That's coming a lot in the texts.
Yeah, makes you feel like you're a failure. And my brother's all about the money.
Yeah.
I do quite an unusual job, and yet in 5 years, he's asked me twice how it's going. But because it's not about the money, the car, the big
he doesn't
house.
care. He's just doing it, almost going through the motions.
Yeah.
Debbie, I'm sorry that what you went through, but I'm glad. No, I know that you're not, because it ended happily. But you have touched a lot of nerves with what you're describing. In fact, I can't remember a topic that's touched nerves in quite this way. Let me read you a couple of summations of that observation before I play you a clip from this week's Full Disclosure. And remember, Sheila's coming back to this subject, I think, at 3:00, and it is absolutely fascinating. So Ash writes, this conversation has opened my eyes, James. My mum has always made occasions about her, especially my wedding and the birth of my children. I just thought she was a bit weird. Now I get it. Thank you, James. And Angie writes, what a brilliant programme. I've reached the grand old age of 70 and finally found out today that my mother was a narcissist. Thank you, James. That has really lifted a lot of the mystery of why she acted the way that she did. Extraordinary and very powerful and moving. And you know, I hope this doesn't sound smug, but it makes some of us realise how lucky we are to have wonderful mothers and parents in our lives, and partners, of course. Joe Pasquale, I think, is a legend. In fact, everyone I've interviewed on Full Disclosure is a legend, and never have I got to the end of the interview liking someone less than I did at the beginning. But rarely have I got to the end of an interview liking someone even more than I did at the end of this one.
I turned up to the audition for New Faces, and it was just like Britain's Got Talent, but there was no audience there, you know, because they show the auditions, and there was 3 people. It was Richard Harris, who incidentally is still the exec producer on Britain's Got Talent as well, after all those many years. And on the panel was Richard, and then there was a producer and a casting agent, 3 people. And I just had one joke that I was going to do, and it was I had my potty, I had the eyes.
Same.
Oh yeah, I had that, and I had.
You had great faith in this joke.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I felt comfortable with it.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then I also had a little toy guitar out of a big guitar case, and I was going to sing a Spanish folk song called "A Moosh a Doogie," and I go "A Moosh is a Doogie," and that was it. But I never got to it because the bloke on the piano started playing all flamenco. He said, "Do you want any dots?" I mean, I didn't know what dots were. He went to music, so if you think of anything, and I said a Spanish folk song, and he started playing flamenco, and I just stood there and looked at him. And then he stopped. He went, "Is everything all right?" I went, "Yeah." I said, "You've already got a job. I'm the one auditioning." And I broke the guitar over my knee. I went, "I'm not doing this." I had a fake stroke. Yeah. And then they kept laughing. And then they said to me, "Who's your manager?" Right? I went, "Mr. Lee." This is actually happened. So, Mr. Lee, who does he look after? I went, "Looks after everyone." And they went, "What do you mean everyone?" I said, "Well, everybody there." I said, "Everybody where?" I said, "Everybody at the camp." I said, "What camp?" I said, "Well, the holiday camp." I said, "What holiday camp?" I said, "Well, in Lowestoft." I said, "What one in Lowestoft?" "Wilderness." "Well, what do you do there?" I said, "Well, I call the bingo." And then the more this conversation got, the more they were laughing. It was like it was a routine, but it wasn't. I was just telling them the truth. And then when they said a manager, they thought I was in show business. I had an act, I had a manager. But he was the general manager, Mr. Lee. And so that whole conversation, they went, "We want you to the show." I said, "But I haven't got an act." I said, "Just do what you did there. You've got 15-piece orchestra to work with." And I went, "All right then, fair enough. I had nothing to lose."
But you knew you were being funny when you
I wasn't like being a div about it. I knew I was, but I also knew it was working for me.
Yeah.
So I went with it. And so then I get to the show, and I had this little bit of an act to do, and I did it in the afternoon, and they had the panel, which was Ken Dodd.
He was a judge.
I think it was Ken Dodd, Nina Mishkelf.
Yeah.
And I think it was Laurie Mansfield, my big agent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They was on the panel, and you did the rehearsal, and in between that and the show, you go to makeup, and Ken came in and sat next to me, and he said to me, "Hello, son." I was, "Oh my God, it's Ken Dodd." He said, "Can I give you a bit of advice?" So I said, "Yeah." And he pulled out a bit of paper. He'd written out my whole act word for word. And he went, "When you do that, take that there, move that to the end there, put that in the middle there. When you get the rabbit out there, put it down your trousers, shake your leg, it'll come out there, get an extra laugh there. Do that there, don't do that one, that's a terrible joke, this is a good one, put that in there instead. If you do that tonight, son, you'll win." And I did it, and I won. So that was it, really. And I didn't know what I was doing. I went,
that is such a moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And because we haven't talked about heroes. You talked earlier about later having mentors. Did you watch other comics? Did you watch? Because Ken Dodd, for people who are a bit younger than me, was so iconic, wasn't he? He was, so extraordinary.
I know. I was really lucky. I got to work with him later on as well, and he always took me under his wing again.
Very generous.
He was lovely. Yeah, not financially, but he wasn't financially generous to anyone, Ken. But no, he was wonderful. I loved him. He was a great bloke.
So that's Midge and Joe Pasquale. Hang on, I'm out of time. Sorry. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back or catch up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store. Head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
And now all we want to know is what the end of that sentence was going to be. Go on.
I can't remember.
James O'Brien on LBC.